Chapter 26. Master Kenobi. We're about to lose the southern wall. Blocking a stray spell, Obi-Wan turned towards the southern wall within the courtyard. Just as Harry had said, the top of the wall was littered with dozens of black-robed individuals that were pushing hard against the scant few Guardian forces, led by General Rex, that manned it. Twisting in place, Obi-Wan felt the momentary disorientation that came with apparition before he appeared atop the southern wall, lightsaber drawn in at the ready. Twisting his body, he deflected two spells back towards their casters before repositioning himself between the defenders and the Sith. Good to see that you could join us, Master Kenobi. Rex called, firing his twin blaster pistol, each shot taking down the Sith forces one by one. Thought that you could use a hand. Obi-Wan shot back as he readied himself for the next onslaught. Hearing a slight crack behind him, Obi-Wan turned and found himself face to face with a robed individual wearing a bone mask. Before he could even move, the masked individual was thrown off the wall by a bolt of light that he recognized as a blasting curse. Turning, he found a grinning Narcissa standing right next to Rex, her wand drawn in at the ready. "And here I thought that you were supposed to be looking after me, Obi," Narcissa said, more than slightly cockily. "Not the other way around. Don't get cocky, Narcissa." An ear-piercing roar from overhead had all three ducking instinctively. Obi-Wan had to shield his eyes as everything around them was suddenly surrounded in bright orange flames. He could feel the heat of the flames, but it wasn't burning agony as he expected. As the heat passed, he opened his eyes and saw Narcissa collapse slightly. The area immediately surrounding the three of them was still fine, but everything beyond a 5-foot radius of them had been reduced to ash. "Not sure." Narcissa gasped as she wiped at sweating suddenly coating her face. "How many more of those shields I'll be able to make?" After quickly making sure Narcissa was okay, Obi-Wan looked to the sky. A lone dragon, far bigger than any he'd ever heard of before, was circling the castle. Flames spewing forth from its jaws as it flew. "That beast is going to make things a lot trickier, General," Rex commented, his eyes following the dragon as he raised his blaster and shot an approaching Sith soldier dead without looking. "Any ground we gain will immediately lose to that beast. We're going to have to trust our air support to take care of it," Kenobi responded, watching as several of their fighters began to engage the beast. "For now, we must focus our efforts on reclaiming the courtyard and securing the castle." "Yes, sir." Rex nodded before moving away to check their position. Kneeling next to Narcissa, Obi-Wan placed a hand on her back. "Are you all right?" The blonde woman nodded, as she used Obi-Wan as a brace to regain her feet. "I will be," she replied. "As long as someone keeps that blasted thing away from, oh you son of a bitch." Narcissa was staring up at the sky as her words tapered off. Flowing her line of sight, Obi-Wan watched as a single streak of black mist crashed into the upper levels of the castle. "Someone you know?" "Unfortunately," Narcissa replied, her eyes going hard as she stared at where the mist had landed. "My no-good bastard son of a bitch ex-husband. And if he's here, now, that can only mean one thing. He's figured out where Draco is." Obi-Wan could feel her intent, but even still he was too slow to stop her as Narcissa suddenly disappeared with a crack of apparition. "Damn it!" Obi-Wan cursed, looking up at the castle. Always on the move. Pulling his fighter into a tight banking turn, Victor grunted against the G-forces that were being exerted upon his body. "Fuck." He cursed in his mind while monetarily glad that Hermione wasn't around. Even with dampeners, you can still feel the GS on a turn like this. I can't imagine what it would feel like on a broom. "Target is below us and on our 2 o'clock. Cedric's voice broken over their internal COMM system as he came out of the sharp turn. Spotting the dragon, Victor jerked the stick back the other way, sending them into a tight spiral downwards towards the low-flying dragon. "Merlin's balls, Victor!" Cedric yelled at him. "It's a fighter, not a fucking broom." Ignoring his co-pilot, Victor focused in on the back of the dragon. Lining up his sights, Victor let loose a volley of blaster fire, several of which managed to impact the dragon's back before they flew past the beast. "Any damage?" Victor all but yelled as he pulled back on the stick, just barely managing to pull them out of their dive before going nose first into the field. "Negative on that," one of their fellow pilots answered. "Shots just impacted the scales and didn't even phase the damn thing." "Bloody fucking hell, what did they do to that thing? Not even dragon scales should be able to withstand the kind of beatdown we're laying on that thing." He wasn't wrong. Ever since the dragon had made a strafing run at the school, every pilot within Guardian forces were focusing in on the beast. But no matter how many times they hit it, the dragon just kept on flying as if they weren't even there. Not even its underbelly was susceptible to their fire. And while they were busy taking useless shots at the beast, the dragon was in turn tearing apart their fighters with its claws, teeth, tail and fire. Going airborne once again to get above the beast, Victor's mind started racing as he tried to think of something, anything, that could bring the beast down. Or at very least slow it down. "Come on, Victor, think like Hermione," he thought as he kept an eye on the dragon. Its hide is all but impregnable. It's almost like they cast a permanent indestructible charm over its scales. So how do we get around that? Or, through it? Slowly, a crazy plan started to formulate in his mind. Making sure he had everything that he would need, he turned over control within the fighter to Cedric. Cedric, take over from here. And tell the others to back off of the dragon until my signal. What the Cedric gasped as the fighter rocked slightly as his co-pilot took control. Victor, just what the hell are you thinking? Something completely fucking insane. He answered before focusing on a point well away from any fighter and the dragon before disappearing with a crack of apparition. Next thing he knew, the wind was rushing past his face as he found himself in free fall. Grabbing at one of the pouches on his belt, he pulled out a shrunken firebolt, which he quickly unshrunken and set himself upon before taking off after the dragon. Laying low on his broom, he kept to the dragon's blind spot as he approached the dragon from the backside. Once he was just above the creature's back, he pulled out his wand and cast a quick sticking charm to his boots and gloves. This is a really bad fucking idea. Victor thought to himself, just before leapt off his broom and onto the dragon's back. He just barely managed to miss one of the dozen spines lining the creature's back, but even still, the impact with the hard scaly back of the dragon drove most, if not all, of the air out of his lungs. Yet, he groaned, holding on tight as the dragon started diving and twisting through the air. Really, really bad idea. Pulling his hand out of his glove, which was still stuck to the dragon's scales, Victor pulled out his wand again and aimed at a random spot on the dragon's back right in front of his face. Let's hope that Hermione was right about this. Narrowing his eyes, he forced all the magic within his body into his wand, focusing on a single thought. The scales just beyond the tip of his wand wavered as he began forcing more and more of his magic into the spell. Come on. Just a little more. Just as his vision began to darken, he released the spell with a sigh of relief as he watched a small section of scales, no larger than his closed fist, transform from their normal scaly appearance to paper. It seems like Hermione was right. He thought, his breath coming out in short bursts before he clenched his wand between his teeth so that he could pull out the blaster he kept on his hip. Unfortunately, that was the relatively easy part. Setting the blaster to its highest setting, Victor placed the end of the barrel against the transfigured scales and squeezed the trigger. The dragon immediately started buckling and twisting, crying out in agony as the blaster bolt ripped through the transfigured paper scales and sunk deep into the dragon's organs. Unfortunately for Victor, while he had anticipated a backlash, he hadn't counted on just how violent the dragon's reaction would truly be. The dragon twisted and turned, dived, climbed. Its snake-like head twisting back trying to bite at whatever it was that had hurt it. And during all of this, two things happened. One was that Victor lost hold of his blaster. And two, and more importantly, he lost his wand to the night sky. Fuck. He cursed, holding onto the dragon for dear life while silently praying that the sticking charms would hold. That was when, as the dragon gave off another loud cry and dove down, that Victor dared to look up. Shite, it's heading right for Hogwarts again. The fighters around them started to try and lead the dragon away, but the beast simply snapped and swatted at the fighters like they were little more than insects as it kept flying straight for the castle. They have no protection. He thought as the spires of Hogwarts slowly got larger and larger. How many men did we lose on its first pass? If it hits the castle again, no. We can't let it pass again. Looking up at the hole he'd created in the dragon's back, Victor reached down to his belt and pulled out a small sphere. Closing his fist around the small object, he brought it up to his eye. Victor gritted his teeth muttering, "All right, asshole, let's see if your insides are tough enough to withstand a thermal detonator." Glancing back down towards the school, Victor closed his eyes. His wand was gone, so he had only one chance at this. And, if he remembered correctly, only 5 seconds to do it in. Pressing on the kill switch, Victor let out a loud yell as he pushed his arm into the opening on the dragon's back all the way up to his elbow. Letting go of the grenade, Victor immediately, and blindly, operated to a spot he remembered in the castle. But just as he felt the pull, the detonator went off, his body engulfing in flames as his body twisted away. And then he hit something hard and lost all consciousnesses. Skidding around a corner with her lightsaber held high, Ginny spun in a tight circle, bisecting the Death Eater that had been lying in wait for anyone to pass him by. Bloody coward! Ginny growled as she kept moving past the dying Death Eater with Ahsoka right next to her. It's a common trait amongst those who follow only the dark side. Ahsoka commented as the two began to descend the main staircase leading to the dungeons. Once the two reached the dungeon level of the castle, they both came to a screeching halt as they came upon Professor Burbage. She was just standing in the middle of the hall, staring forward towards the staircase with a blank look on her face. Sharing a quick look with Ahsoka, Ginny took a tentative step towards the Muggle Studies professor. Professor. Burbage's body twitched as a small stream of blood began to tickle out from the corner of her lips and she fell forward to the floor. Ginny's eyes widened as she caught sight of a large ornate dagger that had been stuck into the professor's back nearly to the hilt. As she stared down at the dead woman, Ginny felt a cold rage overcome her. She didn't know the professor very well, but she still knew and liked the eccentric woman. You have no idea just how long I've dreamed of killing this pathetic blood traitor. Looking up, Ginny found herself facing a young woman that couldn't have been older than Bill. But despite her age, she was powerful. Probably one of the more powerful Death Eaters they'd encountered yet. But her power was focused so heavily within the dark side of the Force that Ginny nearly felt the urge to gag just from being in the girl's presence. Narrowing her eyes, Ginny activated her lightsaber. Ahsoka, go ahead. I'll handle this. Beside her, Ginny heard rather than saw Ahsoka turn towards her. You sure? I'll be fine. Ginny said, not taking her eyes off the woman, who was now idly stroking her wand as she stared at Ginny. Go. Nat and the others need you more than I do. Ahsoka nodded once before turning on her heel and taking off once more. The Death Eater however made no move to follow as she just kept standing there with a slight smile on her face. You're not going to try and stop her? Ginny asked as she sidestepped around Burbage as she inched closer to her opponent. The Death Eater merely shrugged. Why should I? After all, it's you Ginny Weasley that I'm after. Or, do you prefer to go by Spitfire? Ginny nearly lost her grip on her lightsaber before she reaffirmed her hold. Where did you hear that name? The woman threw her head back and laughed. From your brother of course. She said casually. He told me so much about you, I practically feel like we're sisters. Recognition dawned within Ginny, and with it a blinding rage coursed through her. You're the one. You're the one who tricked my brother to his death. Tricked? The woman laughed. That's a strong word. No. Your brother walked into his own death willingly. It was incredibly boring. All I had to do was flash him a smile, my tits, and give him a mild love potion and he was eating out of the palm of my hand within an hour. Although I do suppose that the look of utter hopelessness and despair that crossed his face once I stabbed him in the gut was well worth the trouble. Ginny's rage grew tenfold as she listened to the woman. She wanted to cut the bitch down. No, not just that. She wanted her to suffer. She shouldn't be gifted with a quick death. She had the ability, she could make the bitch's death stretch on for days if she wanted to. And she would. This bitch would suffer like no other for what she. Ginny nearly doubled over as she felt Harry through their bond. Her master wasn't pleased. Sorry, master. Ginny tried to apologize as she quickly worked on regaining control of her emotions. Anger was all right. If used correctly and in moderation. But she couldn't lose herself like she almost did. And she felt like a learner again for almost falling into the bitch's obvious trap. Realizing that her plan to unbalance Ginny had failed, the Death Eater sighed. Well, you're no fun. The Emperor's told us all about you Jedi. How you all constantly deny your emotions. Denying that which defines you. Denying your true potential. I almost didn't quite believe him until now. But you Jedi really are nothing more than walking, unfeeling, statues. Oh, I feel. Ginny responded, narrowing her eyes. Right now, I'm more pissed off than I've ever been in my entire life. But there's a difference between us bitch. I use my emotions. I don't let them use me. It's one of the first things Master Knox and my master, Harry, hammered into my head when I began my training. And I'm going to use these emotions that you think I'm dying to shut your vile mouth. Permanently. The Death Eater stared at her blankly for a moment before a wide grin spread across her face. Excellent. I was starting to be afraid that this was going to be boring. Thank you for proving me wrong Ginny. Retracting her wand into a holster on her arm, the Death Eater reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a long elegant-looking rapier. Beautiful, isn't it? She asked, slashing it through the air a few times. Goblin made and enchanted to be indestructible. And I'm going to use it to gut you just like I did your brother. Ginny arched one of her eyebrows as she let her wand slide back into its holster. You want to fight me this way? Fine by me. The woman smiled as she took a classic dueling stance. Don't be cocky girl. I've been trained in fencing since I was 4. And after I proved my worth to the Emperor, he personally assigned me to be trained by Darth Blackwood to be an assassin. And Darth Blackwood trained me well in how to fight against you Jedi. I know all your moves. And more importantly, how to counter them. Ginny nearly scoffed. Really? Yes. The girl smiled. For instance, you Ginny Weasley use Form 4 Ataru almost exclusively. Fast-paced, aggressive and excellent against single opponents. However, it has its drawbacks. Which is why I set the stage here, in this narrow corridor where your acrobatics won't mean much. Which deprives you of the best defensive option the form has. Perhaps. Ginny said, taking a two-handed grip on her lightsaber and bringing it back up to her right shoulder in a Jedi-ready stance. But we'll never know until we begin, will we bitch? Your funeral. The Death Eater smiled before lunged at Ginny. Ginny waited until the very last moment before angling her body just enough so that the lunge would go wide. She then brought lightsaber to bear, using a fluid riposte to parry the attack and counterstrike. The Death Eater blinked dumbly as she stared first at Ginny, and then down at the green lightsaber that was in her chest. Grabbing the Death Eater by the shoulder, Ginny pushed forward until her entire lightsaber was buried in the woman's chest. "You're right," Ginny said lowly as the rapier fell uselessly to the floor. "I do use Ataru more often than not. But, my master is a highly skilled practitioner of Cheyenne and Gemso, and I picked up more than a few tricks from him." Yanking her lightsaber out of the bitch's chest, Ginny watched with a sense of satisfaction as the Death Eater fell to the ground, clutching uselessly at her chest in vain attempt to hold on to life. Stepping over the body, Ginny used the force to summon the woman's rapier into her hand. It was definitely goblin-made, more than likely a family heirloom. "By the way," Ginny said as the light started to leave the woman's eyes. "I'm taking this." Turning her back on the Death Eater, she tightened her grip on both the rapier and her lightsaber as she set off after Ahsoka. "Rest easy, Percy, your death has been avenged." Crying out in agony, Astoria curled into a tight ball as every nerve in her body felt like it was on fire. "Ah, this was almost too easy." Her tormentor laughed as the pain suddenly receded. Picking up her head, Astoria glared, or at least tried to, at the woman that was standing above her. The Death Eaters hadn't caught them by surprise, not that they could considering they were in a bottleneck corridor with only one way in and out. But while that fact had saved them from a surprise attack, it had also been their downfall as the Death Eaters had simply thrown one witch or wizard after another at herself, Nat, Gabrielle and Hagrid until the four of them were too tired to put up a proper defense. And it was only when that point was reached that the Caro twins had decided to attack. And in no time at all, the four had been overwhelmed and now each were bound being questioned. Trying to push herself up, Astoria had the wind knocked out of her as a heavy boot collided with her back and forced her back down. "None of that now." Electo Caro sneered as the tip of her wand appeared in Astoria's line of sight. "Now then, if you don't want to feel that again, tell us, where are the younger years and the prisoners you've taken?" Spitting out a wad of blood, Astoria turned her head just enough so that she could meet the Death Eater's eyes. "Go, to hell." Once the battle had begun, Astoria, along with Gabrielle and Nat, had decided that standing guard over the young years would only lead the Sith directly to them. So, after stunning and disarming every marked student, they sealed the younger years in a classroom and took off to the opposite side of the castle. They'd wanted Hagrid to stay with them as a last line of defense, but the gentle giant had flat out refused to let them go alone. "Filthy blood traitor!" Electo cursed as she increased the pressure on Astoria's back. "You there, grab her hand and hold her down." Astoria tried to keep her arms curled in, but the hand that grabbed her arm was far too persistent and pulled her arm out straight despite her best efforts. "Now," Electo cooed, her foot leaving Astoria's back as her wand began tracing patterns on the back of her outstretched hand. "You have 5 fingers, so 5 chances. Tell me where they are, or I cast a disintegration hex on your fingers one at a time. And trust me girl, you may think you know pain. But really don't. So, tell me. Where are your prisoners? Leave her alone, you bloody cowards." Sighing, Electo took her eyes off Astoria and glared at the half-giant that was hogtied on the floor. "For the love of magic, someone shove a gag in the creature's mouth already." Astoria's vision of Hagrid was blocked as Electo once again squatted down in front of her, effectively blocking her sight. "Now then, where were we? Oh yes, I remember. How does that muggle saying going again? Oh yes, I remember. Eeny. Meeny. Miny. Mo." Astoria had been bracing herself for the pain she knew was about to happen by closing her eyes, but when cries of alarm came instead of pain, she risked opening her eyes. "Knight to know. Master." Astoria wasn't sure just how the alien knight had managed to do it, but she'd managed to push all the Death Eaters away from Astoria and the others and place herself in between them. Ahsoka spared only a quick reassuring glance at her over her shoulder before facing off against the half-dozen Sith that had been holding them hostage. "Back away now," Ahsoka said, her voice harder than Astoria could ever remember. "And I'll let you all walk away from here intact and alive." Taking her eyes off of her savior, Astoria stared down the hall towards the Caro twins and the other Death Eaters. "You will let us go?" Amicus Carol laughed. "Oh my, that's rich. There's only one of you, and 6 of us." "Yes, I can count," Ahsoka responded. "Although, I must say that I'm surprised to find one amongst you who actually has the brain power to count up that high. Must be an anomaly, or did you just guess?" Amicus' face turned a rather interesting shade of red as he started sputtering. Why you bitch? I'll teach you." "She's goading you, brother," Electo said, holding out her hand, stopping her twin in his tracks. "Trying to get us to attack her one at a time or in an uncoordinated fashion. Too bad for you, it won't work. Now, I was planning on letting die quickly. But now, Now I'm not. I'm going to give you to some of the Emperor's more lecherous followers. They'll just love to have the chance to break in Potter's head, bitch. By the time they're done with you, you'll only be able to wish for. A loud clunk stopped Alecto mid-rant. The noise was followed soon by a second. And then a third. Staring down the hall, Astoria felt her eyes widen as she saw just what, or rather who, was making the noise. What the fuck? Amicus said as he turned around and found none other than Master Yoda standing just a few paces behind. Master Yoda. Astoria breathed, a swell of hope greater than the one that even Ahsoka produced forming in her chest. Master Yoda stared first at the Death Eaters before turning and looking towards Astoria and the others. Harming younglings. Disgraceful. Unforgivable, this is. What the fuck? One of the Death Eaters scoffed. They sent a fucking half-gremlin half-house elf to fight us? I mean, I know that these guardians were scraping the bottom of the barrel looking for recruits, but this is just pathetic. Master Yoda didn't respond to the taunt, preferring instead to keep his eyes on the Caro twins. Night to know. Create a barrier you will. Deal with these miscreants, I shall. Astoria felt her eyes widen even further as Night to know took a step back towards them and created an opaque shield that separated them from Master Yoda and the Death Eaters. Once the shield was in place, Master Yoda's cane disappeared into the wrist bracer on his left arm, while the one on his right produced his lightsaber. Wait, this thing is actually going to fight us? Another Death Eater laughed. Oh, this is gonna be fucking Ricka. The Death Eater's cry echoed through the hall as Master Yoda activated his green lightsaber and leapt, closing the distance between himself and the offending man in less than a heartbeat and brining his lightsaber down in hawkbat swoop, cleaving the man from collarbone to hip in one strike. From her spot on the ground, Astoria could do little more than marvel as she watched the diminutive Jedi Master flip and fly as if he was part avian. He was moving so fast that the Death Eaters couldn't follow his movements, which resulted in them hitting each other with their spells and curses as Master Yoda moved between them. The fight lasted only for a few seconds, but in the end the only two who were left standing was Alecto and Master Yoda. Alecto's left arm was hanging uselessly down by her side after receiving a powerful cutting curse to her bicep courtesy of a poorly aimed cutting curse from her twin, which was better than the killing curse that Amicus had caught full in face from Alecto. You. Alecto gasped, her breath coming in and out in short bursts. You killed my brother. Deactivating his lightsaber, Master Yoda tucked the metal cylinder back onto his waist before re-enlarging his glimmer stick. Fell your brother, I did not. Cast the spell, you did. Alecto's face had gone red with rage as she raised her wand above her head. Die you fucking gremlin. The killing curse leapt out of the end of her wand and went straight for Master Yoda. But instead of dodging, the aged Jedi merely raised his hand and caught the killing curse in his bare hand. Depend on your anger, your hatred. Too much, you do. Yoda lectured as he continued to hold onto the spell, the green light connecting him to Alecto's wand. Remorse for your actions, you have not. Of course not. Alecto screamed, and Astoria could almost feel as the Death Eater started trying to put more power behind her curse. But no matter how much she put into it, Master Yoda merely stood there completely calm. I'm a witch. A Sith. And I'm fucking proud of it. Sith, you are. Master Yoda's voice almost seemed remorseful as he spoke. Jedi, I am. Do my duty, I must. Taking a single step forward, Master Yoda pushed his hand forward. A shockwave spread throughout the hall as the green light of the killing curse was rebounded off Yoda's hand and back towards Alecto. The Death Eater could only give off a single shrill shriek before the light washed over her, and then her voice tapered off as she collapsed limply to the ground. Dead. With the last of the Death Eaters dead, Master Yoda let off a low sigh before pulling his wand out of his glimmer stick. Night to know. He called out as he waved his wand, levitating all the dead Death Eaters up and moving them out of the center of the hall. Yes, Master. Ahsoka responded as she dropped her shield. Return to the front lines, you must. Master Yoda stated as he dropped the Death Eaters into a pile. Stay and guard the younglings, aid them, I will. Turning to look at Ahsoka, Astoria could see the indecision etched upon the knight's face as clear as day. But after only a moment of silence, and a single look back at Nat, Ahsoka nodded and gently laid the little Nautolan back down onto the ground. As you say, Master Yoda. Ahsoka said with a slight hitch in her voice. Please, protect them. Of that, my oath you have, Night to know. Master Yoda nodded as he lazily waved his wand, conjuring up a soft bed out of the floor underneath Astoria and the others. Just as Ahsoka was about to take off, a new person skidded around the corner. Both Ahsoka and Master Yoda drew their lightsabers, and both froze just as quickly as the person came to a skidding stop with both hands raised. Whoa. Surrender. Ginny said slowly, staring down the ends of both Master Yoda's and Ahsoka's lightsabers as she kept both hands, one holding her deactivated lightsaber and the other holding a rapier of all things. You're late. Ahsoka stated, deactivating her lightsaber as she passed Ginny by. Got hung up for a moment. Ginny replied, her head going back and forth between Ahsoka and the others. Where are we going? Back to the front, go you must. Watch over the younglings, I will. Master Yoda replied, conjuring up a small chair which he climbed up into. Need you soon, your master will. Ginny blinked, but nodded quickly. Yes Master Yoda. She replied before bowing to the ancient master and taking off after Ahsoka. Astoria looked at the departing girls then back towards Master Yoda. Master Yoda? You do know this position was merely a feint, to draw the Sith away from real position. Yoda, now comfortably sitting on his chair hummed in agreement, know this I do. Away from the front you should be. The old Jedi Master sighed, distasteful war is, for younglings it is not. Running through the halls of Hogwarts, Narcissa ignored the fighting going on around her, her attention focused solely on the upper levels of the castle where her ex-husband had landed. That bastard! She hissed in her mind as she bounded up the stairs, taking them 2 or 3 at a time. He's after Draco. No doubt to drag my son even further into his previsions. But I won't let him. Draco may have fallen, but I won't let him fall to the level of his father or their master. Stopping on the 4th floor, Narcissa stood in the middle of the hall leading to the area where the marked students were being held and waited. She didn't have to wait long as a black mist impacted the floor and solidified into the form of a man wearing a bone mask. Hello Lucius. The figure stood before her silently for but a moment before raising a hand to its face and making the bone mask disappear in a cloud of black smoke. Narcissa. Her former husband sneered. I'm surprised to find you of all people here. Where else would I be? She asked, palming her wand. Someone has to protect my son from your idiocy. Lucius regarded her as if she'd just said something incredibly amusing. Your son. He repeated with a shake of his head. Do you want to know what he said to me just before coming back to this school? He told me that his Aunt Bellatrix is more of a mother to him than they, what were the words he used again? Oh yes. More so than the blood traitorous bitch that birthed him. The words struck her right in the heart, but Narcissa kept her face completely impassive as she met the cocky grin of her former husband. He's still a child. She countered. A child that has been corrupted by you. And no matter what he says or what words you've put into his head, he is still my son. And I will do everything that I can to ensure he lives. Then you should have stayed with us. Lucius shouted, his eyes almost glowing with anger as he took a half step towards her. Do you have even the faintest idea what your betrayal cost the Malfoy name? How I had to grovel on my hands and knees before the Emperor to ensure him of my and Draco's loyalty to the cause. I couldn't give 2 shits about the Malfoy name. Narcissa shouted, her wand snapping down into her palm almost of its own accord. I care about my son. The Emperor doesn't give a shite about anyone or anything. To him, you're all disposable pawns to be used and discarded when it best suits him. I really don't care if you're willing to be used and killed in such a fashion, but I won't allow such a fate to befall Draco. Even if he hates me for the rest of his life, even if he never speaks to me again, he will still be alive. And that is all that I care about. Lucius seemed slightly startled by her outburst, but he quickly recovered as he nodded towards her wand. And what do you think you're going to do with that? Fight me? Please, you couldn't fight off a fly. Smiling, Narcissa took up a modified dueling stance, her feet spread, her offhand in front of her and her wand hand held up near her eye level. Ah, good old Lucius. Still underestimating me. How do you think I managed to get out of the manor? Pure luck or my good looks? No. It was my skill with magic and wits that made all of your underlings look like pathetic fools. Lucius stared at her with utter contempt. Fine. He growled, pulling his wand out of his cane. It's far past time for me to correct my mistake. Avada Kedavra. Narcissa knew that the spell was coming even before Lucius drew his wand. Her ex-husband was nothing if not predictable, that was for sure. Stepping to the side, Narcissa let the green light pass her by useless before responding with a quick cutting curse towards his legs. But Lucius proved to be just as agile as she thought as he deftly sidestepped her curse and returned the favor with one of his own. Snapping her wand down, she deflected the curse with a slight shield and countered back. The hall filled with the sound of Lucius shouting spells at the top of his lungs as he began to get angrier and angrier as Narcissa continued to deflect or dodge each spell that was sent her way before countering. Hold still you bitch! Avada Kedavra! Pirouetting, Narcissa spun out of the path of the killing curse and retaliated with 3 cutting curses of her own. Lucius managed to block 2, but the third managed to graze him in his wand arm. Despite scoring a hit, Narcissa remained impassive, her face completely serene as she resumed her dueling stance and waited for the next barrage. What the fuck? Lucius growled, his breath coming in and out in short pants. Where did you learn to fight like this? A new friend. Narcissa explained, not able to help the slight skip in her heart that happened whenever she threw of Kenobi. Focus Narcissa. Now is not the time to swoon like some schoolgirl with a crush. He's the one who rescued me from your flunkies and he's been helping me to refine my technique as of late. Is that so? Lucius sneered. Well then, I'll have to present your corpse to him then. Avada Kedavra. Narcissa had managed to cross the expanse between them before Lucius could utter the last syllable of the spell. Her fist, while small, was able to do just enough as she embedded it as hard as she could right into Lucius's diaphragm. Her ex-husband doubled over as all the breath left him, and with 2 quick flicks of her wand she sent his wand flying away from him and sent a bound Lucius to the ground. It's over, Lucius. Lucius glared up at her from his spot on the ground. If you truly believe that, then you're as fool as you are stupid. I managed a situation like this before, thrived even. I simply need to bide my time. Send me to whatever prison you wish, Draco will not leave me. I will get out one day and I will come for you, you bitch. Narcissa stilled as she stared down the length of her wand at her ex. You're right, she nodded. You would get out eventually, and as long as you live you will still have a hold on Draco. Lucius' eyes narrowed and then widened as realization dawned on him. You can't. I surrender. You can't, this is against the light. Her stance and eyes didn't waver, causing Lucius to get desperate with his pleas. Narcissa, think of all the good times we never had any good times, Lucius. Sweat was forming on his brow as his eyes, the only part of his body that could move, darted around widely. Draco. Our son, he won't forgive you for this. Probably not. Narcissa agreed, her wand never leaving him. In fact, he might just hate me for this. But as I said, Lucius. He will be alive. And free from you. Lucius was nearly shaking now. Narcissa. Avada Kedavra. The green light leapt from her wand, and in almost slow motion, Narcissa watched as the light connected with Lucius's chest, ending his life. Finally, Narcissa breathed, removing her wand from her ex-husband. I'm free. And so is Draco. You can come out now, Obi-Wan. Light footfalls came from around the corner as the former Jedi, now Guardian, Master came around the corner and towards her. His face was completely blank as he strode towards her. His eyes flickering only once down towards Lucius before refocusing in on her. Narcissa felt her heart thump with each step he took. Morgana, damn it. Why doesn't he say something already? Narcissa's patience finally wore out as Obi-Wan stopped within arm's reach of her. Do you hate me now? Her heart nearly stopped as she asked the question without realizing it. Part of her, a large part, didn't want him to answer. If he said yes, she didn't know what she would do. Ever since she'd fled the Death Eaters, Obi-Wan had been a constant source of strength and comfort for her. If he turned his back on her now, Morgana help her. Obi-Wan broke eye contact with her to look down at the corpse. No. I don't hate you, Narcissa. I don't think I could. And before you ask, while I do not agree with killing captured foes, I understand why you did it. And I don't blame you for it in the slightest. Narcissa felt as if a weight had been lifted from her heart. Without realizing it, her feet moved her towards Obi-Wan. The master blinked at her, but before he could move, her hands had already come up and were running lightly through his beard. And then, without planning it, her body leaned forward as her hands pulled him towards her, and their lips touched ever so slightly. The kiss lasted only for a moment, but in that moment Narcissa felt like a little girl again being kissed for the first time, especially when Obi-Wan stared to reciprocate. Before they could get carried away, and while she still had some functionality of her mind, Narcissa pulled back and coughed slightly. Well, that was bloody wonderful. Obi-Wan stared at her blankly. Slowly, the corners of his lips turned upwards. I couldn't have said it better myself, Narcissa. Licking her lips, Narcissa straightened herself. Right, well, we will be continuing on with this later, dear Obi-Wan, when we are not in the middle of a war zone. Obi-Wan's slight smirk turned into a full-fledged smile. I look forward to after the battle then, my dear. Now, shall we? Yes, Narcissa nodded, while silently cursing whatever divinities that existed for making her blush. Let's finish this, Obi. Blocking the overhead strike, Nox lashed out with a force push, forcing Ajkaran to backpedal and then flip backwards as he reached the edge of the stairs she'd been pushing him to. Impressive, Nox. Ajkaran grinned as he landed lightly on his feet at the bottom of the stairs. I must say, your skills with a lightsaber have improved dramatically since our joint venture against Ravan all those years ago. I should hope so, Ajkaran. Nox replied, descending the stairs towards her opponent. After all, I've spent the past year practicing with an Ataru master and a Sorcerer master. I'd be quite disappointed if I hadn't improved. Feeling a pulse from the force, Nox took a single step to the side as a Death Eater landed right where she'd been standing. Pulling his wand, the young man turned towards her with a look of pure rage on his face. Dai Bisia. The young man's words cut off as Ajkaran used the force to grab the young man by his throat and lift him clear of the ground. She's mine. Ajkaran growled, his hand extended, and his fingers curled inwards. No one fights her but me. With a twitch of his hand, the young man's neck snapped like kindling and he dropped to the ground dead. Good to see that some things haven't changed, Nox remarked as she stepped over the dead body and continued down the landing Karen was standing on. You still kill your followers as easily as you do your enemies. Karen grinned as he shrugged. It's one of the reasons why I'm stronger than you, Nox. I'm willing to cut away any weakness. No. Nox shook her head. It's why you're alone. Lunging forward, Nox brought her lightsaber down towards Karen's head. The Sith pureblood raised his single lightsaber to block before countering with a slash from this saber staff. Ducking under the blow, Nox felt the heat of the saber staff pass over her head as she used a force push to move her past Karen just as his lightsaber came down where she'd been standing. Going back on the offensive, Nox spun low using Ataru as she advanced on the Sith. Karen blocked each of his strikes before countering and forcing her to fall back on Sorsua as she backpedaled away from Karen's vicious onslaught of attacks. Leaping over a low attack at her legs, Nox flipped over Kane's head, her left hand pointing down at the ground as her right brought her saber down on him. Karen raised his saber staff to block her overhead attack, and then leapt forward to avoid floor she'd transfigured into quicksand. As soon as her feet touched the ground, Nox spun and raised both of her hands, sending a bolt of heavily concentrated green force lightning at the Sith. Karen, while still recovering from his escape of her trap, didn't have time to properly block the attack and was forced to block with his lightsaber. The bolt detonated as soon as it encountered the blade, throwing Karen back, through the window behind him and down in the small courtyard below. Running towards the opening, Nox immediately had to apparate away to the far side of the courtyard as a stone statue came flying into the window. Her feet barely managed to touch back down before she felt a force push slam into her gut, sending her through the air out of the courtyard and away from the school. Landing on her feet, Nox rolled forward as Karen came flying down, his lightsaber stabbing deep into the spot where she'd landed. Regaining her footing, Nox quickly looked around her surroundings. They were well outside of the school grounds at this point. In fact, they were far closer to the Forbidden Forest than they were to the castle. Good. Nox thought as she readied herself. We're clear away from everyone else. I don't have to keep holding back anymore. Nox, you have no idea just how long I've been dreaming of this moment. Karen almost purred as he slowly rose to his feet, both lightsaber and saber staff pointing away from her. The moment when you and I would cross blades. Really? Nox asked despite herself. Of course. I've been fascinated by you ever since I learned your name. Karen replied, turning back around to face her. You were slave Nox. You weren't supposed to survive Korriban, let alone became a full-fledged apprentice to a Sith Lord. But you did. And then you killed anyone, including your own master, that stood in your way as you rose to the top of the Sith Order. You killed Sith Lords, Jedi Knights, Jedi Masters, and several Darths. And in the end, you became the youngest Dark Council member since its formation. And perhaps one of the most powerful Sith in the Empire next to myself, Mar and the Emperor himself. How could I not dream of the moment when you and I would finally cross blades? And I must say, you are not disappointing me in the least. Glad you approve. Nox remarked. You however, I'm most disappointed in. I expected more from the Emperor's wrath. Karen. What's the matter? Spent too long sleeping in your kennel like a good little doggy waiting for his master's permission to wake. Throwing his head back, Karen let out a throaty laugh. Oh Nox, how I have missed your wit. What he did next caught Nox completely off guard. Karen deactivated his lightsabers and put them both back on his belt. But I'm done talking just yet. You see, I was looking forward to this meeting, that was until the Empire and the Republic formed an alliance against the Revanites and you and I came face to face once again. With one look I knew. You'd become weak, complacent, corrupted, and I knew exactly why. Instead of corrupting your little pet Jedi, she corrupted you. So I did what I had to do to bring Darth Nox back. Reaching towards the small of his back, Karen brought out a third lightsaber. As soon as Nox saw the hilt, and the blue blade that emerged from it, she almost lost her grip on her own lightsaber. She knew that lightsaber. She knew it almost as well as she knew her own. After all, she was sitting right next to Ashura as she built it within their cabin. She put up one hell of a fight. Karen smiled as he looked down at the blade. I almost thought that she might actually be the one to kill me. But in the end, she failed. And with her last breath she whispered your name. Nox's mind began reeling as a red-hot rage she hadn't felt in a long time coursed through her entire being. Why? Karen gave her a quizzical look. Why? I thought it would be obvious. She was corrupting you. Making you weak. She made you lose the spark in your eye that marked you as one of the most powerful Sith in millennia. But after she was removed, that spark returned. You returned to who you truly are, Darth Nox. And your retribution against those I set up to take the fall for your Jedi's death was all the proof I needed to know that I made the right decision. Any reason that was left in Nox's mind was slowly evaporating as the darkness spread within her, even as she tried desperately to fight against it. You killed Ishira. Grinning, Karen held her lover's lightsaber aloft. Yes, I did. And now, I'm going to use your lover's lightsaber to send you to her. Like a shot, Karen sped towards her, Ashira's blade held high ready to cut her down. Raising her own lightsaber, Nox waited for the Sith to come closer. Just before Karen reached her, she let out a breath. For you, Ashira. My love. She whispered into the ether of the Force before deactivating her lightsaber. Rushing towards Nox, Karen could almost feel the beat of his heart in his chest. Never had he ever felt such elation. He'd never been afraid before during a fight. Not even when he fought against Ravan. Not even against his own master. But against Nox he knew the fear of uncertainty. Nox was one of the few in the galaxy that could kill him. To fight against her and know this fear, there was no greater pleasure or strength that came from it. And now that he'd revealed that it was he who killed her former lover, that elation only grew. The look in her eyes, like she wanted to peel the skin from his flesh one strip at a time. This was the true form of Darth Nox. The true adversary he'd been waiting a lifetime for. But just as the two were about to clash and continue their dance of death, Nox's lightsaber deactivated, allowing his own lightsaber to travel unimpeded right into her chest. No. He breathed in horror, staring down at the blue blade embedded in Nox's chest before looking up at her face. Almost in slow motion, her body fell backwards as the blue blade slid out of her. No. You stupid bitch. Why? Why did you do this? Who will be the one to inspire such fear in me now? Hey? Who else will threaten me with death so easily? Then he blinked. Where once Nox had been falling, now only her cloak was falling to the ground. I intend to do more than threaten you with death. Rikyukoro. Karen felt something, 6 rods of light to be exact, slam into him from different angles. And as soon as they did, he found himself completely immobilized, both physically and through the Force. A slim hand reached around from behind him and deftly plucked the lightsaber from his grasp. I'll be taking this back. Karen couldn't help but gawk as Nox stepped out from behind him. His eyes, the only part of his body that could move, darted back and forth from Nox's pierced cloak to Nox, standing whole and unharmed. No, it isn't possible. I felt the blade pierce her flesh. I saw her die. I felt her die for a moment. How? Not even a Force illusion can do this. Despite himself, Karen laughed as he saw the look in her eyes. Incredible. He laughed, or as much as he could with what little he could move his jaw. Your hatred has made you more powerful than even I anticipated. You may scream and deny it, but both you and I know that truth. The power that lies in the darkness. The power that you have once again embraced. Once again, Darth Nox will walk the galaxy and all will fall before her. Nox's face didn't change once, not even a slight twitch of a muscle. She just stood there, staring at him while holding onto the Jedi's lightsaber. No. Nox said simply, making Karen frown. If one were to use solely the dark side alone, they would never be able to do what I just did. It isn't the darkness that makes me powerful, Karen. What makes me powerful is the same thing that made Ravan so powerful. Balance. Balance. Karen almost spat the word out. Complete and utter shit. There is no such thing. The only true power is the power of the dark side. You may be able to fool the Jedi that follow you, you might even try to fool yourself. But I know the truth. You are still Darth Nox. The Sith lady who cut a bloody path through the galaxy on her rise to power. And you will do so again. Nox's eyes never left his as she deactivated the blue lightsaber and clipped it onto her belt. I wouldn't expect one such as yourself to understand. And I'm not going to bother trying to explain it to you either, Karen. Nox said, taking a step towards him. Darth Nox started dying the moment she went into stasis on Korriban. And now, with your death the last remnants of her will die as well. Alone. And in the darkness. As is the fate of all who follow only the path of darkness. Her right hand rose to chest height, her fingers forming a V over her palm with her thumb in between. May the Force reject you forever, Karen. Kurohitsuji. Karen struggled as Nox took a step back, only to be replaced by a black wall which was slowly rising around him, cutting him off from the world around them. As the last speck of light began to fade, Karen finally knew true fear. The fear of death. And he laughed. Standing on his perch overlooking the battle for the castle, Emperor Vitiate frowned as he felt a quiver from the Force. His last, and best, weapon had just met its end. First Blackwood. Now Karen. He growled, turning his back on the battle. Useless. All of them. Walking down the slight slope, Vitiate walked up what remained of his forces. Only a few dozen of his condemned remained. A few dozen of the hundreds he'd sent into the castle to secure his new temple. A temple that was defended by children, a handful of Jedi and a few squadrons of soldiers. Failures. Vitiate cursed even as he felt Voldemort trying to emerge from the hole he'd put him in. All of them. Nothing but failures. Walking up to the closest of the condemned, Vitiate put his hands behind his back and turned back around so he was once again facing the castle. Retrieve the diadem. He commanded without looking back. Kill whoever gets in your way. And bring it to me. Go. The condemned didn't answer, not that they could. They simply vanished through apparition, leaving Vitiate alone overlooking the ongoing battle. In the end though, it won't matter. He thought, looking up into the night sky which had begun to chill quickly. They will all die in the end. All to feed a better purpose. With that last thought, and with a smile upon his face, Vitiate disapparated away from his spot. Watching as the last of the black coffin surrounded Karen, Nox let out a shuddering breath she hadn't even realized she'd been holding. This spell, it was not one to be used lightly. It created an isolated pocket of space within that was subjected to untold numbers of black holes and gravity-defying constructs. It also cut the victim off completely from the force to prevent them from trying to break free. Almost as soon as the coffin was complete, it disintegrated. The figure that was inside could barely even be considered humanoid anymore. It'd been bent, broken and twisted to the point where it was little more than a mass of flesh, bone, and blood. Turning her back on the pile, Nox made it 2 steps back towards the castle before her strength gave out and she collapsed to her hands and knees. A coppery liquid filled her mouth as she coughed, spitting blood out on the grass. Fuck. She groaned, spitting out another wad of blood. That was not what I expected at all. Karen had been right. What she'd done hadn't been a force illusion. There was no illusion that could be created in such a short amount of time that would have been powerful enough to fool one of Karen's caliber. No, what she'd performed was an incredibly obscure magical technique known as Utsasimi or rather cicada shell. When in use, the practitioner moved so fast without operating that they left behind a clone of themselves for a moment. The problem with that was simple physics. No mortal body, no matter how durable, was made to travel at such speeds. Through the force she could feel her multitude of internal injuries from broken bones, to torn ligaments to bruised organs. She was a mess. The only reason she'd even been able to stand as long as she had in front of Karen was because she'd been using the force to hold her upright like a puppet on strings. Well Ziri, I never expected to find you of all people in this position. Nox felt every fiber within her being freeze. No, it can't be. She thought even as her heart started beating wildly in her chest with longing. Raising her head ever so slightly, she found herself face to face with an orange-skinned Torgrudo with large white markings around her eyes and long montrals that nearly reached her waist. Ashura. Nox breathed, not believing what she was seeing, and feeling, as she stared at her long-dead lover. No. You shouldn't be here. You should be one with the Force. At peace. Ashura's lips turned upwards as she smiled. Oh Ziri. I am one with the Force. More so than I ever thought possible. Nox's brow furrowed as she struggled to sit upright. But, how are you here? The veil around this planet should be preventing any outside interference. Ashura nodded, her smile fading ever so slightly. That's true. And for a long time it has. But ever since you came here, our bond allowed me a window of sorts into this world. A hazy window, and one that I could not pass through, but a window nonetheless. But now the veil has almost completely diminished. And those who are able to do so within the Force can pass through it with enough focus. Those who are able to do so? Nox questioned. She means us Darth Nox. Turning her head to the side, Nox blinked dumbly. Darth Mar, Master Shan. She said, giving an ever so slight nod to the 2 Force ghosts that had appeared to her left and right respectively. Well, isn't this one big happy family reunion? Here to give me another task? 'Cause if you haven't noticed, I'm still tits deep in the last one you 2 gave me. We're here because you need our help Nox. Looking over Ashura's shoulder, Nox sighed as a 4th presence made himself known. Ravan. Nox greeted cordially. Okay, I'll bite. What do I need your help for? It was Ashura who answered. Your plan for the Emperor Ziri. It won't work anymore. Feeling another headache coming on, along with every muscle in her body enflamed, Nox groaned. Fucking wonderful. Okay, why won't it work? The Emperor has had too much time to recover his strength through physical representations of his ritual. Sately Shan explained. Through these creatures that you call Dementors. Even after the destruction of his soul anchors, he will have too much power to simply be banished by your ritual Nox. Darth Mar finished for the Jedi Master. Groaning, Nox felt what little strength she had left leave her as she collapsed back down onto the ground. Fuck, I thought that he might get stronger. But to resist the banishing, fuck. Then, all of this, it's all been for naught. Feeling a slap upside her head, Nox jerked upright. Ashura was sitting right next to her, a light smile playing on her face. I never knew you to be one to give up so easily, Ziri. And besides, do you think that the four of us would just come to you now just to tell you that all hope is lost? Please, what happened to the Ziri that I love? The woman who walked right into the Dark Council chambers, back-talked to the most powerful Sith in the galaxy, and then completely bitch-slapped a council member without even batting an eye. Blinking, Nox looked at each of the four Force Ghosts in turn. You're here to help? How? Simple. Darth Mar said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You alone cannot hope to banish the Emperor. Therefore, the five of us will do it. As one. And with that, their plan slammed home in Nox's mind. No. She breathed, shaking her head. You've done it before, Nox. Ravan reminded her. This will be no different. It will be. Nox shouted before instantly regretting it as her body was racked with pain from her sudden movement and she collapsed once again to the dirt. Those were Sith that I bound before. They weren't one with the Force. Ashura, all of you are one with the Force. If I bind you, it could damage your connections to the living Force and we could die. Sately Shan stated plainly. Or rather cease to exist. We know this of this possibility. And we accept it. Ziri. Ashura said softly, one ghostly hand lightly brushing against Nox's black hair. This is our choice. Just like it is yours. We will do anything, even cease to exist, if it means removing one such as vitiate. Seal the pact in blood, Nox, and our power will be yours. Staring up into her lover's eyes, Nox tried to non-verbally talk her out of this course of action. But Ashura merely held her gaze, not giving an inch. Still as stubborn as ever. Nox sighed, breaking their deadlock and slowly picking herself up off the ground. Really, Ziri? Ashura grinned. You calling me stubborn? That's rich. Yeah, bite me. Nox grumbled before quickly holding up a finger as Ashura grinned. And don't say it. That's my line, girl, and you know it. As touching as this is, we do not have time for it. Ravan cut in, ending the all too brief moment. Seal the pact with blood, Nox. And our power will be yours until the Emperor is no more. Nodding, Nox pulled out her wand and with a light cutting curse opened the palm of her hand. Her blood flowed freely from the wound and onto the ground below as she channeled the force into the wound in her blood in the first stage of the binding pact. Hurry up. Nox said tiredly. I was drained, to begin with. And now, I don't how much longer I can hold on. As one, the four raised their hands and started to glow as the force flowed through each of them. She knew it was coming, but it still did not prepare her for when the four powerful force presences disappeared from her sight as they flowed through the force and into her. The impact sent her sprawling onto her back and gasping from breath as power unlike any she'd ever held flowed through every cell in her body. Her back arched as pain racked her body. But as quick as the pain came, it went as the sheer amount of power within her began to heal her physical body. Her wounds sustained from fighting Ashkaran were healed almost immediately. Old wounds that had been long since healed over reopened and then healed as the force fixed her body. The process lasted only but a second, but it felt like hours as her body acclimated to the sudden intake of power from not one, but four powerful force presences. When at last it was over, Nox sat up quickly and looked herself over. She felt good. No. Good was an understatement. She felt better than she'd ever felt before in her life. Floating up to her feet, she held out her hands and summoned both her lightsaber and wand back to her hands. I'm coming for you, vitiate. Nox grinned almost fearfully as she felt untold amounts of power coursing through her. Taking one step towards the castle, she stopped as a new sensation hit her. One of fear. Despair. Agony and then nothing. Staring up at the castle, Nox felt all the blood drain from her face. The euphoria she'd been experiencing from the sudden influx of power died as she isolated where the feelings were coming from. Or rather, from who the feelings were coming from. Harry. Slapping her last clip into her rifle, Jane leveled the weapon out and squeezed the trigger the moment she had a read on one of the spike-headed Death Eaters. 2 shots later, one to each kneecap, and the creature was down. But even that didn't do much as it continued to try and crawl towards her. Snapping her wand out into her hand, she fired off a quick killing curse into the creature's back, ceasing its attempts to reach her. Hearing a low growl next to her, she spun in place readying her wand. How the spike had managed to get so close, she wasn't sure, but by the time she got around the bastard was nearly on top of her. A spell was just about to leave her lips, when a glowing blue blade pierced through the neck of the condemned, killing it instantly. Nodding a quick thanks to the young Maris brood, Jane retook her position with the apprentice and her tonfa-like lightsabers by her side. I think that was the last of them. Maris said, as the two stared down the empty corridor filled with dead men and women Sith, witch, wizard, and non-magical. For now. Jane remarked, checking her weapon over and doing a quick mental count of how many rounds she had left. Casting a quick glance over her shoulder, she did a quick head count. Only 5 of us left. She thought, her eyes moving back down the corridor, searching for any more threats. The battle within the castle had been one of constant flux. They started out holding their ground against superior numbers and doing a hell of a job of it for a time. But then when the numbers started to threaten to overtake them, their reinforcements arrived, evening out the battlefield once more. But now the Sith were unleashing these spike-headed bastards on them. One of her men had put it best when he compared them to zombies. 'Cause that was pretty much all they were. Except for the fact that they were magically resistant and usually took half a clip to put down. In fact, the only weapon that was effective against the once human creatures seemed to be lightsabers. Ammo check. Half a clip, ma'am. 1 clip. 5 rounds. Shit. She cursed, turning and handing her weapon off to the man with the least. Make it last, soldier. No one gets past us. Yes, ma'am. The younger man nodded, taking her weapon and checking it over before casting a quick glance down the bottleneck hall they were guarding. At the end of the hall was probably one of the most important parts of the castle now. At least in Jane's mind it was, considering that Madame Pomfrey had set up her makeshift hospital in this closed-off section of the castle. During their brief and quick time setting up the castle's defenders, one of Jane's first and foremost concerns had been the location of the medical wing. It was too exposed for her tastes. And too well known for that matter. It would be a primary target once the fighting started. She'd been prepared to argue her case for moving the hospital with Madame Pomfrey when the old Mediwitch surprised her by taking out her wand and summoning just about everything that wasn't nailed down within the hospital wing into a small bag which she then tucked under her arm. The witch had then calmly turned to her and stated that she knew a more secure location for the hospital and had taken off without looking back. More are coming. Maris Brood called out, settling down into a stance with both of her lightsabers at the ready. Defensive positions. Jane called out, falling back with her men to what little cover was available to them while keeping a tight hold on her wand. Wait. Maris called out, holding up her hand. This presence, it's, hold your fire. They're friendlies. Just as the words left her, 3 figures skidded around the corner coming down from the staircase next to them. Fucking hell. Jane breathed as she lowered her wand, motioning for her few remaining men to do the same. You 3 are lucking you're not Swiss fucking cheese right now. Across from her, Ron, Tracy, and Hannah all looked half shocked and half scared shitless as they found themselves staring down at a proverbial firing squad. You didn't keep your senses open. Maris said, shaking her head. You have to keep focused, especially during a battle or you will be killed. The 3 shared a quick look with one another, but whatever they were about to say was cut off as Jane stepped forward. Lesson for another day. She said, standing in front of the 3. Did you 3 complete your mission? Yes, ma'am. Tracy nodded. Where's Master Knox? We need to get it to her now. Last we heard, her shuttle landed in the courtyard. Maris answered. But that was some time ago, who knows where she is now? Then let's see if someone does know where she is. Jane said, bringing her COMM link up. Maris's eyes went wide as she suddenly spun around in a tight circle and tackled Jane to the ground. Look out! The hall erupted into pandemonium as the glass windows near them shattered and dozens of black clouds descended upon them. Fuck! Jane shouted, rolling up to her feet and bringing her wand around to fire off a cutting curse at point-blank range right into the chest of one of the newly arrived spikeheads. Form up! Defensive positions now. Any hope of holding a line was lost as the spikeheads swarmed over Jane, the Guardians, and the few men she had left. There were simply too many and her voice was lost in a sea of shouts, gunfire, lightsabers, and spells. But strangely enough, despite having the advantage, these ones were not pressing towards the infirmary. It was only as 5 managed to separate Tracy off from the others that it finally clicked in Jane's head. They're after the Horcrux. She shouted, letting loose a blasting curse into the chest of one spikehead and sending him into another. Everyone! Rally around Tracy! We can't! Tracy screamed as one spikehead impaled itself on her lightsaber, allowing a second to get within her guard and thrust a crude dagger into her stomach. The next few moments almost seemed to pass in slow motion as Tracy's wide eyes stared at the spikehead that had impaled her. Instead of twisting the dagger, the creature let it go and began rummaging around inside her robes. The creature gave off an inhuman growl and then it took off down the hall like a bullet with 5 others, leaving an impaled Tracy to fall limply to the floor. Tracy! Ron screamed, his voice laced with the force as he slashed through the few remaining condemned to get to the fallen girl. Racing up to her side, Jane stopped Ron just as he was about to pull the dagger out of her. Stop! She said, placing her hand atop of his. Those daggers are usually serrated. It's designed to do a lot more damage on the way out. We need to leave it be for now and get her down the hall to Madame Pomfrey. Understand me, apprentice? Ron stared at her like he wanted to argue, but Jane just stared him down with the same look that had cowed numerous insubordinate soldiers in the past. Lieutenant! Tracy gasped, drawing Jane's attention to the girl. Don't talk! Jane said, looking down at the dagger. You'll be fine. Shaking her head, Tracy's eyes stared to tear up from the pain. No, the Horcrux, they have it. The world stopped. The Horcrux, the last item keeping Voldemort mortal, was now in the hands of the condemned. The enslaved foot soldiers of the new Sith. Marius, Jane said, whipping around. You're the fastest. Intercept those 5 now. We can't let them get back to the Emperor. Hannah, you go with her as well. Yes ma'am. Marius acknowledged before taking off like a shot with Hannah only a pace behind her. Rising to her feet, Jane glanced around the hall. 2 more of her men had died in the attack, leaving only 1 man left still standing from her original squad. Gather their ammo. She ordered her last remaining troop before turning on Ron. Get her to the infirmary and then come back out here with me. We need to guard this spot no matter the cost. Redirecting a cutting curse with his lightsaber, Harry reached out and sent a powerful force push at the caster, sending the man sprawling backwards ass over tea kettle into a stone column with enough force to knock loose 2 of the foot square bricks. Then, without hesitation, he turned and threw his lightsaber. His purple-black blade spun through the air over the head of Master Sakura and into the chest of the assailant that had been trying to sneak up on her before he recalled the blade with a force pull. My thanks, Night Potter. Master Sakura said as the 2 stood back to back against the oncoming Death Eaters. Anytime, Master Sakura. Harry responded as he deftly deflected 2 cutting curses away from himself and the Twi'lek. The fighting in the courtyard had died down significantly since the arrival of the Sately Shan and their reinforcements. Several of the Death Eaters had taken one look at the giant cruiser, seen the destruction it brought when it annihilated the Acromantula, and then promptly fled the battle. Those that weren't magical had taken to a defensive strategy and had dug themselves in as they realized that they no longer had the numbers to attack, but were unable to escape as well. The only truly still offensive measure the Sith had were the few giants that were still lumbering around the courtyard. But even then, there were only 2 of them left. Even as the thought was in his head, one of the giants roared in agony as Commander Gregor rolled between the giant's legs while firing his blaster upwards between its legs. And while its mouth was still open, General Rex finished the creature off with a single shot from his blaster pistol that went right through the roof of the giant's mouth and out the back of its head. Seeing the opportunity to turn the tide completely in their favor, Harry Operat, appearing in the air just above the last remaining giant. Reversing his grip on his lightsaber, Harry brought his blade down, piercing the back of the giant's neck as he fell. The giant roared in agony as it started to thrash about, its arms reaching back trying to get at Harry. Leaving his lightsaber embedded in its neck, Harry leapt over the giant's head and landed gracefully on his feet in front of the giant. Turning in place, Harry snapped out his wand and sent a powerful blasting curse through the giant's open mouth. The beast immediately stopped thrashing, its eyes rolling back up into its head as it fell forward and crashed into the ground. Walking up to the dead giant, Harry pulled his lightsaber out of the giant's flesh. Nicely done, Night Potter. Master Sakura said, walking up next to him, her lightsaber still active and her eyes scanning the yard. Thank you, Master. Harry nodded, turning around and ready to face off against the next threat. Only to see that the courtyard was nearly completely devoid of Sith forces. Virtually everybody that was still upright in the yard belonged to Guardian forces. There were still a few stragglers fighting, but for the most part the courtyard was completely clear of enemies. Deactivating his lightsaber, Harry stood up to his full height as Master Sakura approached him. Okay, he said, looking around. You're the experienced one here, Master Sakura. What do we do now? Pursing her lips, Ayla looked around. This is not all of them. The presence of the cruiser must have made the Emperor pull his forces back for the moment to re-evaluate his plan. Not to mention, there are still those within the castle that need to be dealt with. We best use this time the Emperor has given us to drive out the stragglers and prepare for his next wave of attack. Nodding his head, Harry could see the logic in what she said. Yes, ma'am. After you. The 2 managed to take 2 steps towards the entrance of the castle when a heavy weight from the force fell upon their shoulders. Stopping, Harry whipped around and stared up into the night sky. He's here. The words had barely managed to leave him when a black cloud slammed into the ground, sending a slight shockwave through the small courtyard, making Harry and Ayla reflexively cover their eyes for a moment to keep the dust from blinding them. When Harry lowered his arm, he felt his heart thumb in his chest. Standing just before them tall and proud was Voldemort. Only, it wasn't him. Voldemort's normal red eyes were gone, replaced by a deep yellow that indicated that the Emperor was in fact in control. But it wasn't his sudden appearance that caused Harry's heart to race, it was his presence. Unlike when he'd briefly caught a glimpse of the Emperor back during the assault of Azkaban, the presence of the one before them was almost unbearable to stand before. Unbidden, sweat began to form on Harry's brow as he and Master Sakura stood before the Emperor. What the fuck? Harry cursed, fighting the urge to wipe at his brow. Even just standing before the Emperor right now is taxing. How? A single gunshot rang out through the courtyard, and Voldemort was forced to take a step back to avoid the blaster bolt that passed uselessly just in front of him. Without taking his eyes off Harry, Voldemort raised his hand and sent a single bolt of force sliding towards the one who fired the shot. The man who fired the shot didn't even manage to get out a single cry as the bolt completely disintegrated him where he stood. "Everyone fall back!" Harry shouted, igniting his lightsaber. "We'll handle him. Secure the castle now." Their men in the courtyard didn't hesitate to follow his order as they all began to systematically fall back into the castle. The only one who hesitated was Commander Gregor, but a sharp look from Master Secura sent the clone commando back into the castle with the rest of their men. As the courtyard rapidly emptied, Voldemort merely stood there watching impassively. When finally, it was just the three of them, Voldemort spoke, but it was the Emperor's voice that passed through his lips. "Amusing," Vitiate said flatly. "You think to defeat me with only the two of you? While both of you are impressive, neither of you are close to my equal." Feeling a shift in the force, Harry let a slight smile cross his lips. "Whoever said that it would just be the two of us?" Two soft thuds landing behind Harry announced the arrival of Kento and Malimarak. And then a second later there were two more soft landings announcing the arrival of Ahsoka and Ginny. Despite now being outnumbered, Vitiate just continued to look at the six of them impassionedly. "3 masters," he said. "2 knights. And 1 apprentice. 6 on 1 might have evened your odds in your feeble mind. But even if you threw every Jedi on this planet against me, it still wouldn't be enough, boy. We'll just have to see about that." Harry responded, taking out his wand and firing off a single flare spell above his head. Vitiate didn't even react outside of watching the flare travel skywards for a moment. "Your aim leaves much to be desired, boy," Vitiate said with a slight amount of amusement seeping into his voice. Smirking, Harry lowered his wand. "Whoever said that that spell was meant for you?" Seeing the signal rise from the castle courtyard, Quinlan turned back towards Asajj. "That's the signal, babe. Let's do this." Turning back towards the 3-meter-tall spire, one of 5 the two had spread out around Hogwarts. Quinlan and Asajj both raised their hands and pressed their palms against its cool stone surface. Closing his eyes, Quinlan drew deeply on the force, letting it flow through him as he acted as a conduit between the living force and the spire. Time lost meaning as the force flooded through him, his vision blurred until he could see nothing besides glowing spire right in front of him. And as quick as the sensation came, it went as the spire pulsed and he was physically pushed back, breaking his contact with the stone. "Damn!" he muttered, whipping at the sweat upon his brow, feeling like he'd just done a marathon run through the ground layer of Kashyyyk. "That is an elegant way of putting it." Asajj nodded, looking just as exhausted as he felt if not more so. Grabbing a vial from his belt, Quinlan popped the top off it before draining the contents down his throat. "Holy shit!" he muttered as the potion, which Nox called a pepper-up potion, worked its way down. He didn't know what was in this potion, and given that he'd read a few of the potion books he didn't really want to know. But whatever it was, it worked. With one small vial he felt like he'd just woken up from a solid 8-hour rest cycle and downed an entire pot of Java. To his right, Asajj was polishing off her own vial, her face immediately regaining most of its normal coloring even before she lowered the vial from her lips. "Damn, this shit is good." Asajj smiled as she tossed the vial over her shoulder. "Well, old man, think you can keep up with me? Or do I need to call a transport for you?" Giving his lover a lopsided grin, Quinlan cracked his neck and rolled his shoulders. "I'll race you there, love." Returning his smirk, Asajj turned towards the forest. "Just try not to stare too hard at my ass while we're running. Don't want you trip over something and force me to stop to help you up." Feeling the barrier snap into place, Harry let a small smile grace his lips as he faced off against the Emperor. "You're not going anywhere." If the Emperor, or Voldemort, was unsettled by the development, they did a fine job of hiding it. "I see." The Emperor's smooth voice intoned as he stared upwards at the night sky. "So, this was Nox's plan. Destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes and then trap him so he couldn't flee so you can kill him. How remarkably dull. I expected more from her." Taking a step forward, Harry leveled his lightsaber towards the Emperor. "A plan doesn't have to be fancy or complicated to work." "Quite." The Emperor nodded before tilting his head slightly. "You think that you've won? That this trap is the end for me?" Shaking his head, the Emperor took a few steps forwards, making all the guardians present ready their lightsabers and wands. "Let me dispel that belief. It is not I who is trapped here. No. You are all trapped here with me. We'll see about that." Harry growled before taking off like a shot towards the Emperor. He'd barely managed to cross half the distance between the two when the Emperor raised his hand. Raising his lightsaber, Harry readied himself to deflect the oncoming force lightning he knew was coming while behind him, Ginny and Ahsoka readied themselves to jump over him and ambush Vitiate. However, instead of a single bolt of lightning, the Emperor sent a proverbial tidal wave of force lightning at him. Skidding to a stop, Harry whipped out his wand and shouted a barrier spell at the top of his lungs, with Ginny and Ahsoka joining him a split second later. The wave of lightning washed over the three of them and brushed aside their hastily risen barriers as if they weren't even there. During his training, Harry had been on the receiving end of his mother's force lightning more than once. And it always put him down quickly, especially when she put something behind it. But this was something else completely. The moment the lightning destroyed his barrier, every nerve within his body became inflamed as pain unlike any he'd ever known before racked every inch of his body. He wasn't even aware he'd been airborne until his back impacted something hard and he fell limply to the ground with Ashoka and Ginny on either side of him. Pathetic. Rolling onto his side, Harry managed to get up to one knee, his body still throbbing as the after effects of the force lightning still coursed through his body. Across the field, he watched as Vitiate engage Ayla, Kento, and Mali with an almost bored expression on his face. Each of the masters were ducking, rolling, and slashing with their lightsabers and lashing out with the force, but Vitiate didn't even move an inch despite their onslaught. He hadn't even drawn his lightsaber, preferring instead to block each attack, be it by lightsaber or through the force, with his bare hand. How? Harry breathed, rising to his feet and shaking off the last remnants of the Emperor's attack. How is he so powerful now? He wasn't this strong before, was he? Drawing his lightsaber again, Harry ran across the courtyard while the Emperor's back was turned and brought his lightsaber down hard in an overhead attack. The Emperor merely raised his hand, and Harry felt his entire body freeze when his lightsaber was still a good foot away from the Emperor's back. You don't understand it, do you, boy? The Emperor asked as he swept aside Kento and Mali with a wave of his hand as they tried to come to his aid. Well then, let me explain. And do listen closely, boy, I do not like repeating myself. When Nox destroyed the portion of my power that was locked away in that tomb, I was greatly weakened. And I was weak. But now, my creations have had ample time to feast and regenerate my power. And now none of you stand a chance against me. Harry felt his body squeeze as the Emperor closed his fist, tightening his hold on him. Let him go. Turning his head as much as possible, Harry saw Ahsoka running towards them as fast as she could, her green lightsaber out and a look of pure fury across her face. Harry wanted to scream out to her, to tell her to stop, but his jaw wouldn't move, and the words wouldn't leave his lips. And just like him, once she was within reach of the Emperor, he simply raised his hand and encased her in the force to hold her still. Your fury is something to behold, my dear. The Emperor said with something almost akin to pleasure in his voice. But while your attachment to this boy gives you power, it is also your greatest weakness. The Emperor's hand opened, and Harry was powerless to do anything but watch as Ahsoka was sent flying away from the both of them and across the courtyard into the wall of the castle. Ahsoka. Harry breathed as he stared at her prone form. You, son of a bitch. There was a thunderous crash that stopped everyone in the courtyard as they covered their ears. The windows of the castle shattered as the binds that had been holding Harry in place dissipated and his feet touched back down. Around the two of them, dust began to swirl around the two of them, separating Harry and Voldemort from everyone else in the courtyard as they were either forced to take a step back, or be forced back by the swirling winds. Turning around towards him, Vitiate stared at him curiously. Interesting. The Emperor spoke, taking a step towards Harry despite the cyclone being created around them. Your power is remarkable. But at your level, you shouldn't be able to manifest the force as you are now. No doubt the knowledge that was given to you by the Celestial is what is allowing you to do this. But I wonder, how long will you be able to hold this up? Already the strain is starting to show. You are not ready to wield this type of power, boy. I can keep this up all day. Harry shouted defiantly, lying through his teeth. Holding up the storm was more taxing than he could have imagined. Part of his mind told him to just let it die, but another part of him wouldn't let him. He heard Ahsoka. He needs to pay. Forcing himself to stand as straight as possible, Harry tried focusing the storm in on Vitiate. The winds around them tightened around the two of them, making Vitiate stop in his tracks as the pressure from the storm forced him to stop. Tell me, Harry, do you wish revenge for what Riddle did to your parents? If so, then I can help you accomplish this. And I will gladly do so. The storm faltered ever so slightly around the two of them. What? Vitiate's lips curled upwards. I said, Harry, that I will let you take your revenge on Riddle. No tricks. No deals. Nothing. I will let you kill him here and now. The storm separating the two of them from the rest of the world died as quickly as it came as Harry's concentration broke. Almost as soon as the storm died, Harry felt invisible binds grab hold of him, snapping his arms to his side and lifting him up off the ground. At the same time, a blue opaque sphere encompassed the two of them. The bonds that kept Harry attached to his mother, Ginny, and Ahsoka all dimmed to the point of non-existence as the barrier settled. And just beyond the shield, Harry watched as Master Sakura stepped up to it. Her eyes passed over the shield once before she experimentally touched the barrier with her lightsaber only for it to have no effect at all. Just behind her, Ginny was making a beeline for him, only to be stopped as Master Sakura turned around and grabbed his petite apprentice around the middle, preventing her from touching the barrier. The Twi'lek is smarter than she looks. This barrier is a variant of a ray shield. Had your young, impulsive apprentice touched it, she would have died on the spot. The Emperor said calmly as he stepped closer. They cannot hear you, Harry. Nor can they reach you. It is just you and now. And before you think that I tricked you, I have not. I meant every word I said. You wish to kill Riddle, of that there is no doubt. Who would not want to avenge the death of his parents? And I fully intend for you to do so. Why? Harry asked despite himself. Riddle is your servant. Why would you let me kill him? The binds holding him in place loosened and Harry felt his feet touch back down, but he still couldn't move. Because he has failed me in more ways than you can possibly imagine, Harry. And if your mother has done proper job in educating you, you know the price of failure. Stopping less than a pace away from Harry, Vitiate stared at Harry appraisingly. I can sense your doubt. And I can understand it. Perhaps this will convince you otherwise. A commotion coming from the entrance of the castle drew his attention. 3 of the condemned were running towards the barrier, completely ignoring everyone around them. Ginny and Ayla moved to intercept the 3, but 2 of them split off to divert them, allowing the third to continue. When it reached the barrier, to Harry's confusion, it didn't stop. What had once been a man ran straight through the blue shield as if it wasn't even there. It managed to take 2 steps after it passed through before falling forward onto its face. They are useful tools. Vitiate commented calmly as he walked over towards the corpse. Raising his hand, a small black bag floated up out of the dead condemned hand and up into Vitiate's. Harry felt his stomach plummet as he recognized the black pouch as the one of the ones given to Ron, Tracy, and Hannah to contain the Horcrux after they found it. Opening the pouch, Vitiate extracted a jewel-encrusted diadem from within before turning back to Harry. The last of Riddle's Horcruxes. Vitiate said calmly as he stepped towards Harry once more. Without this, Riddle will be mortal once again. And then without any preamble, Vitiate closed his fist around the diadem, wrenching an unearthly scream from the object as a black mist was forced out of it. Harry could just vaguely make out the image of Voldemort within the mist, the apparition screaming out in agony before it disappeared forever. The binds that had been holding him in place disappeared completely and Harry immediately brought his lightsaber to bear. That's it, Harry. Vitiate said calmly, taking another step towards him until the tip of Harry's lightsaber was less than an inch away from his chest. Take your vengeance. And while I know you can't hear him, Riddle is screaming inside the cage I put him in. But there is nothing he can to stop you, Harry. Avenge your parents, Harry. End his miserable existence once and for all. Harry's hand was almost shaking as he stared down at the tip of his lightsaber hovering just over Riddle's heart. All he needed to do was move his blade forward 2 inches, and he would avenge his parents. And why shouldn't he? This was the moment he'd been training his entire life for. The chance to kill his parents' murder. And now here it was, on a silver fucking platter. So why was he hesitating? He should just do it. Finish Riddle here and now and be. Harry. Don't. You can't kill him yet. Vitiate will just disappear if you do. And that's exactly what he wants. Don't give the bastard what he wants, Harry. Ahsoka's voice cut through him like a knife. Looking down, he realized he'd begun involuntarily moving forward, his black-purple blade lightly scorching Voldemort's robes. No. Harry shouted, jumping back away from Vitiate. I won't give you what you want, Vitiate. Vitiate's yellow eyes, once filled with compassion, turned to pair of burning infernos of anger. Idiot boy. Vitiate spat, his lightsaber snapping down into his hand. If you had simply done as I bid, then this would have been so much easier. But now, I fear you will have to suffer for your insolence. Preparing himself for the attack he knew was coming, Harry raised his lightsaber into a defensive stance. It wouldn't be the first time. Harry shot back with a grin. Do your worst, jackass. Vitiate's lips curled upwards into a cruel smile. Oh, I intend to. Vitiate's lightsaber came around and Harry moved to intercept it, only to have the blade miss him entirely and embed itself into Riddle's chest. Harry could do little more than stare dumbfounded as Vitiate's yellow eyes faded and were replaced by Riddle's blood-red eyes. Voldemort stared down at the lightsaber in his chest dumbly as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. No. Riddle gasped, the lightsaber deactivating and falling away as the Dark Lord fell to his knees. My Emperor, this was my destiny, not his. Harry watched as his most hated enemy fell onto his face, dead. Shit. Harry cursed, staring down at the fallen Dark Lord. He wasn't supposed to die yet. Now we have no idea just where Vitiate will disappear. Harry clasped both hands to his head as something slammed into his mental shields like a battering ram tearing through paper. His mind felt like it was on fire as he fell to his knees, screaming in agony. He could vaguely hear Ahsoka screaming as well, but her voice in his mind was rapidly growing faint. Oh, foolish boy. I have no intention of disappearing just yet. Operating into existence, Nox stared at the scene in front of her in horror. All the guardian forces within the yard were all down on the ground, wounded or dead. The only ones who were still on their feet were Ginny and Ayla, who were standing before a blue semi-opaque half-sphere which dominated over half of the yard. Stepping up to the half-sphere, Nox felt what little blood was left in her face drain away as she stared at the scene within. Riddle was dead. A wound from a lightsaber right over where his heart was. And Harry, her son, was on his hands and knees, his entire body shaking. Reaching out, she tried to sense her son. But there was nothing. It was as if the bond that had been between them had disappeared and replaced with an endless void. Raising her hand, Nox hovered her palm just above the blue barrier. A ray shield of some sort. Powerful, but not enough. She thought before narrowing her eyes in concentration and destroying the barrier with a single thought. Even with the barrier down, there was no reaction from Harry as her son remained bent over on his hands and knees. Approaching Harry slowly, Nox frowned at the feeling of wrongness wafting off him. Harry. It was only because of her deep connection to the Force that Nox was able to slide back far enough to avoid the purple-black blade of her son's lightsaber. Your skills are indeed as sharp as ever, Nox. It's no wonder you managed to defeat my wrath. Nox froze. She knew that voice. And it didn't belong to her son. Looking up slowly, Nox was met son's eyes. And to her horror, she found Harry's bright green and black eyes replaced by ones that were deep yellow and cold as ice. Vitiate. Nox growled. You son of a bitch. How dare you try and take over my son? Seeing the twisted smile that came over Harry's face tore at her heart. It was quite easy actually. Vitate's voice spoke out from her son's lips. The boy had some decent mental barriers. But nothing that I couldn't tear down. And now, he has retreated deep into his mind and is hiding like a coward. Her anger flared as she heard her son spoken of so. But before she could do anything rash, she forced herself to stay in place. My son is no coward, Vitiate. If he has retreated into the recesses of his mind, it is to protect the knowledge that was granted to him by the Father. Which is exactly why you wanted Harry, isn't it? How does it feel, knowing that you're being bested by my son? The corner of her son's eye twitched ever so slightly. It matters not. Vitiate said dismissively. Be it today, tomorrow, or 10 years from now, I will erode what is left of your son. And the knowledge that had been bestowed upon him shall be mine. And then there will be none in the galaxy that will be able to challenge me. I think that you are underestimating my son, Vitiate. Nox responded with a coy smile. Just like you did with Aiden all those years ago. How many times did he kick your ass again? Enough. Vitiate shouted, causing a mild shockwave to pass through the yard as the force traveled through his voice. Raising his arm, Vitiate leveled Harry's lightsaber at her. I will not stand here and be critiqued by a child who lacks the will to do what is necessary to obtain true power. I suppose this is a fitting end for you, Nox. Being killed by your own son and apprentice. How poetic. The apprentice shall become the master, and so shall the cycle continue on. Seeing movement out of the corner of her eye, Nox subtly motioned with her hand for everyone to stay back for the moment. Your overconfidence is your greatest weakness, Vitiate. She said, keeping her attention solely on the Sith Lord in front of her. One of Harry's eyebrows rose. My overconfidence? Vitiate asked curiously. Perhaps it is your own overconfidence that must be taken into consideration, Nox. You cannot best me even if you had 1,000 years to ready yourself. It is not Master Nox that you are underestimating. Ahsoka called out, limping up so that she was standing next to Nox with one hand holding her side. It's Harry. He's far more powerful than you can possibly imagine, Sith. And he won't let you hurt Nox or myself. Is that so? Vitiate asked, smirking. Well then, let's put your theory to the test then, creature. Harry shot towards the two of like a bullet. His lightsaber raised and ready to cut them both down with a single strike. But despite it all, Nox and Ahsoka held their ground, defenseless. Just as Harry's lightsaber started to come around, his entire body froze as if he'd been struck by a paralysis spell. What? Vitiate gasped, staring down at Harry's body, which was refusing to move. How? No matter how far you try to bury him, we will always be able to find him. Ahsoka answered as Ginny limped up beside her. I never really understood just what that whole part of the prophecy meant when it referred to us girls as Harry's wings. Ginny said as she stood tall beside Ahsoka. But now I do. All of us have a connection to Harry in some form or another. Some more powerful than others, but nonetheless important. And through our bonds, we can reach Harry and uplift him from whatever darkness you've put him in. Tightening the knot of cloth around Luna's arm, Daphne stared at her apprentice in the face as she winced slightly. The wound wasn't the worst that Daphne had seen, but the cutting curse had certainly done a number on her, and in an effort to conserve energy, Luna had told her to simply bandage it off. Just as she was finishing, Daphne felt the force lurch like a punch to the gut. What the? She gasped, whirling around in the direction the sensation came from. That, what they? It's Harry. Lune said, her eyes far away from where they were. He needs his wings. He needs us to help him fly out of the darkness. What? Daphne asked, turning back to Luna. Luna's hands grabbed hold of her own as her eyes closed. Just, reach out and hold onto Harry. This is our part, Daphne. We need to help him or he will fall. Deciding to place her faith in her apprentice, Daphne cast the most power barrier she could manage around the two of them, closed her eyes, and reached out for her friend through the force. Hold on to us, Harry. Standing next to Hermione, Susan watched as her apprentice calmly conjured a white sheet and carefully draped it over the still form of Victor Krum. The two had been fighting within the castle when Hermione suddenly stopped and ran to the nearest window just in time to watch the large dragon explode and fall to the ground. And then without another word, Hermione turned around and started running deeper into the castle, leaving Susan struggling to catch up as she trailed behind her apprentice. But no matter what she did or said, Hermione didn't stop until the two came to the library. The library was a disaster. Bookshelves were knocked over, desks overturned, and books lay everywhere. And in the center of the room lay the reason why Hermione had taken off. Victor Krum lay in the center of the room, his limbs twisted at odd angles from splinching and well over half of his body was blackened from burns. Hermione gave off a cry and ran to her boyfriend's side, cradling his head as her wand started moving over his body frantically, trying to heal whatever injuries she could. As Susan moved up beside them, she closed her eyes and let out a breath. Victor's chest wasn't moving. And his presence in the force was gone. Hermione, she said, kneeling next to her frantic apprentice. He's gone. No. Hermione mumbled, her wand falling out of her grip as she bent over Victor. No, he can't be gone. He promised me. He promised me. Susan didn't know what to say or do. None of her training, be with the Guardians or with her aunt, had prepared her for how to deal with a situation like this. So, she did what she could and simply knelt next to Hermione and placed a hand on her shoulder. I'm so sorry, Hermione. Hermione didn't say anything in response, preferring instead to remain prone over Victor's still form. After a solid minute, Susan stood back up and retreated towards the entrance and started casting several wards on the entrance to try and give Hermione the time she needed to grieve. But after nearly half an hour now, Susan knew that time was no longer on their side. Hermione, she said softly approaching her apprentice. It's time for us to go. We can't linger here any longer. Stifling a sniff, Hermione nodded and after laying her hand on Victor one last time, rose to her feet. You're right, Master. Hermione nodded, her voice firm despite the tears falling down her face. We have a job to finish. That we do. Susan agreed, taking a turn to head out of the library. She made it only a single step before she doubled over as the force lurched. Beside her, she heard Hermione gasp and knew that her apprentice was feeling the exact same thing as her. What? Hermione breathed, clutching at her middle. What's going on? It's Harry. Susan answered, although she wasn't quite sure just how she knew it. He needs us. What? Hermione gasped, her head shooting around towards her. Closing her eyes, Susan reached out through the force and felt along the faint bond she shared with Harry. But Harry's presence was muted. Almost to the point of being non-existent. But even still, she could feel Luna, Daphne, Ginny, and even Ahsoka reaching through the force towards the muted presence of Harry. Close your eyes. Susan said, not bothering to open her own as she tried to feel her way towards Harry using the others as a guide. Reach out and look for Harry. We have to guide him out of whatever darkness has claimed him. Standing side by side with Ginny and Ahsoka, Nox watched on in no small amount of satisfaction as Harry's face twisted in displeasure. You think this will be enough? Vitiate asked. This boy's power, these girls' powers. They will not be enough. I am eternal. I have touched aspects of the force that not even you have dreamed of, Nox. These seven stand no chance against me in a battle of wills. Smirking, Nox reached into her robes and grabbed hold of the small bottomless pouch she kept on her. Then let's even the playing field. Reaching into the pouch, Nox pulled out a silvery cloak. Harry's eyes widened as the Emperor renewed his struggles. Without a word of explanation, Nox used the force to levitate the cloak in front of her, and destroyed it along with Vitiate's soul shard. An ear-piercing cry of agony left Harry as his body struggled against the invisible binds. You! Vitiate growled, his yellow eyes narrowing at her. No good, slave by. Nox cut him off as she pulled out the stone from the pouch and destroyed the object before the Emperor, causing another cry of agony to leave her son. Your son feels this agony, Nox. Nox's hand froze as she began reaching for the wand. Vitiate, seeing her hesitation, smirked at her. Those cries you are causing, they are not my own. But those of your son. Each one you destroy, I redirect the pain to your son. You should hear him now. The pain is worse than any torture you could possibly imagine. And I make him feel it 10 times over for each one you destroy. You continue on, and your son's essence will vanish under the pain I'm putting him through. Pulling out the wand slowly, Nox carefully levitated the object in front of her. My son is strong, she said, meeting Vitiate's golden eyes. Stronger than I. And stronger than you. He can more than handle anything you could possibly throw at him. And with that, Nox destroyed and third, and last, of the Sith Emperor's soul anchors. With the last of his anchors destroyed, her son's head snapped back as the Emperor let loose a cry of rage. The very air around them grew thick as the dark side of the Force began to swirl around them so thickly Nox could almost reach out and touch it. You shouldn't have done that, Nox. Vitiate said, his voice returning to his normal calm. Now, if I go, I will be taking your son with me to the void. No. Nox said, shaking her head as she stepped towards Harry until barely an arm's length separated the two of them. You won't, Vitiate. I won't let you drag my son down with you. Placing the palm of her hand against Harry's forehead, Nox delved deep into the Force as she focused on the connection she shared with her son. Trying to isolate his presence away from the Emperor within him. Beneath her hand, Harry smiled cockily. What are you attempting, Nox? Vitiate asked as she felt the Emperor repel her attempts to find her son. Ah, you're trying to isolate your son from me so you can hope to dissolve my essence while leaving his intact. A sound plan, but flawed, just like you, Nox. Even with those girls holding onto your son through the Force, and even though you have weakened me considerably, you still lack the power to separate the two of us. Let alone to banish me. Pushing harder against the Emperor, Nox let a small smile cross her as she felt a ripple in the Force. Whoever said that I was alone in this endeavor, Vitiate? A second hand, this one gloved and ethereal, appeared atop her own. Harry's eyes snapped up and glared as the ghostly figure solidified next to her. Ravan. Vitiate hissed as he stared at the Force ghost. Impossible. You could not have bypassed the shroud so easily. I didn't. At least not easily. Ravan responded. But your attention has been divided and your shroud weakened. And together we were able to bypass your shroud. And with Nox's help we were able to ensure our continued presence here. One of Harry's eyebrows twitched. You didn't think that Ravan was alone in his desire to rid the galaxy of your stain, did you? Nox asked as Ashura's hand joined Ravan's. Which was soon followed by a third and fourth as Sadal and Mar both appeared as well. Mar. Vitiate hissed. Again, you dare to betray me. The towering form of Darth Mar turned towards the Emperor. I told you long ago, Vitiate. I will never kneel before you again. With the aid of the 4 Force ghosts, Nox was able to delve deeper into the Force than she ever thought possible. In no time at all, she was able to discern between her son and Vitiate and forcibly separate the two of them apart. A surge of victory went through her as she isolated Vitiate. It's over, Vitiate. Nox could feel Vitiate struggling in vain through the Force as he tried to battle against not only her, Ravan, Sadal, Mar and Ashura, but Harry and the girls as well. You think you've won, Nox? Vitiate asked. You haven't. Everything you build will one day come crashing down. Because you lack the will, the power, and the drive to truly seek what should be yours. Perhaps. Nox nodded as she put more pressure on the Emperor. But you will not be here to see it. Pushing even harder, Nox pulled on every ounce of power she had. She could feel Vitiate's essence fracturing beneath the onslaught as she pushed harder and harder. And then it happened. His essence broke. And Nox felt her feet leave the ground as light blinded her and then she knew only darkness. Standing on the bridge of the Sadal Shan, Admiral Hackett watched as hundreds of dark cloaked shapes floated through the air, heading towards both the castle below and his ship. Jones. Hackett called out, startling the crewwoman that was working at a terminal near him. Why yes, Admiral. You're a witch, are you not? Hackett asked, not taking his eyes off the Dementors that were starting to circle the ship. Yes sir. You know the counter spell to ward of these creatures, don't you? He asked as the Dementors began landing on his ship. The Patroness Charm. The witch half asked, and half stated. Yeah, yes sir, I do. But I. Good. He said, turning towards her. Cast you spell now, Jones. Or everyone on board will soon be soulless walking corpses. The young woman looked scared shitless, but she nodded and drew her wand. Admiral, might wanna hang on to that thought a second. Turning his attention back towards the front of the ship, he stared at their pilot. What is it, Morrow? The helmsman didn't say anything as he nodded towards the forward viewport. Walking up to the helmsman, Hackett stared out the port. As he did, his eyes went wide. The Dementors were disintegrating. Ensign. He shouted, I want a report from the surface now. Report is just coming in, sir. One of the crewmen responded. They did it. The Emperor, he's gone. Confirming report from Master Sakura. The Emperor has been destroyed. And Master Nox is alive, but she's requesting shuttle to bot down immediately for the wounded. Admiral, report from Blade Squadron, the Dementors, all of them, they're all disappearing. Report from the surface, Admiral. Master Voss reports that the remnants of the Sith forces are in full retreat. For the first time in what felt like a long time, Hackett let a smile cross his face as he watched Dementor after Dementor freeze up and disappeared. She did it. She actually fucking did it. Chapter 27. Sitting in his office, nursing his wounds, Dumbledore felt every one of his nearly 130 years weighing down on him like a lead weight he was unable to shake. For over 50 years he'd been carrying the Death Stick. And for 50 years he failed to realize just what its true significance was. For sure he knew that it was one of the 3 Deathly Hallows, but he was blinded by legend and failed to see the true evil behind the wand. It wasn't a mythical powerful object, it was a Horcrux for the greatest dark entity to ever curse the surface of Earth. And he'd been in possession for it for over half a century. Hearing a soft cooing and a light nudge on his hand, Dumbledore absent-mindedly began to scratch his familiar's head. For over half a century, Fox, he said to his phoenix. I carried that accursed wand for over half a century and never even realized just what it was. But you, my friend, you knew. You always tried to take it away from me whenever you could. I should have listened to you, my friend, I should have listened to my instincts. I should have listened to Gellert when he told me after our duel to destroy the wand at all costs. But I didn't. In my hubris, I ignored you all. I failed. Failure. The greatest and harshest mentor, it is. Sighing, Dumbledore made a quick glimpse out of the corner of his eye. Sitting peacefully on the balcony railing was a small green creature reminiscent of a goblin cross-breded with a house elf. He briefly wondered why he hadn't sensed the little being's approach, but then a quick mental scan, which was thoroughly rebuked, answered that question. The little being was powerful. Incredibly powerful. And given that he had never seen anything like him before, there was no doubt as to how he'd arrived. Yet, despite the being's sudden and unexpected appearance, Dumbledore wasn't afraid. He was ready. Yes, it is, Dumbledore nodded, agreeing with the little being. And just when I thought I'd learned from my failures, I ended up repeating them again and again. And with each successive failure, the fallout grew exponentially. And now, here we are. At the end of the road, I guess. And? The little green creature asked, one of its eyebrows rising. No. This is not the end. Not for you. Not for me. Now Dumbledore was confused. Didn't Nox send you to kill me? At this, the little creature looked offended. Hopping off its perch, the little creature used its cane to help it limp across the space between them. Kill you? No, no. Misunderstand Nox, misunderstand myself, you do. Your death, serve no purpose it does. In life, help still you can. Help? Dumbledore scoffed. Some help I am. For nearly 50 years I've led the wizarding world down a path of ruin. It was only because of one whom I considered my enemy and did everything in my power to stop, that we managed to avoid total annihilation. How many people are going to want my help now? Misunderstand me again, you do, the little green being said, hopping gracefully up into a chair across the desk and settling down into the cushion with his legs crossed. Help others you can. Lead others, you and I, cannot. Our time as leaders, over it is. Our time as aides, advisors, and mentors, begun, it has. Learn from failure you must. Teach off of what you learned, you still can. Feeling a shift under his hand, Dumbledore watched as Fox left his perch and went over to the small green creature. The little being stared up at the phoenix with a smile on his face as Fox began to trill a peaceful tune. Fox likes you, Dumbledore said calmly, letting the song of the phoenix settle over him. So, if I'm not to be killed, then I might as well do as you say and make myself useful. I have but 2 questions, who are you and what does Nox need of me? The green creature smiled at Dumbledore nodding in agreement, Yoda, I am. Jedi Master, the last I will be. Yoda sighed. Long the Jedi protected the Republic and galaxy until betrayed by the Sith we were. Misunderstand Nox, you did. Yes. Dumbledore frowned, Jedi? Sith? So the Sith are your enemies? Yes, I greatly misunderstood her. I thought she was leading young Harry down a dark path. I realize now how wrong I was. Chuckling Yoda shook his head his amusement, dark the path is the way of the Guardians. Necessary it is. To defend and defeat the darkness, Guardians must tread within. In balance they are. Correct you are, but incorrect. A dark path awaits many Guardians. Jedi seek the dark places with caution we did. Dumbledore furrowed his brow in memory trying to recall the words Harry spoke to him that he ignored, I see. You have much wisdom, yet you are no Guardian. Guardian I am not. Too old I am to change. Nearly 900 years I am, long have I trained Jedi I have. Teach still I will. But too old, yes, too old to change my path. Yoda smiled at Dumbledore's shocked look. Standing upon her balcony overlooking the Guardian Temple, Nox frowned as her mind raced. Despite the death of the Emperor and elimination of most of the upper ranks of the new Sith Order, the war was still very much in full swing. Nightshade had survived the encounter and was now more than likely consolidating what was left of her forces. Forces that Nightshade controlled now severely diminished. More frustrating that it was forces would have a hard time countering, especially considering how nearly 3/4 of the world was currently warring against itself. Nightshade wasn't all that concerned her either. While she expected that Vitiate's death would trigger the downfall of the Shroud around Earth, she hadn't anticipated just how fast Darth Sidious would latch upon their location. Within seconds of Vitiate's death, she could sense Sidious's foul presence scouting out Earth. Luckily, the Sith had been so astounded by what he'd found that he left himself completely open for a split second, which was all she needed. With his sense stretched so far, she was able to send an attack of her own back at the Sith, using his own force presence as a guide, and she blinded his force vision. He could still see the future, but his ability to stretch his senses across the galaxy would be next to non-existence. At least for a decade or two. Long enough for Nox and her allies to properly plan on how to combat the Galactic Empire. But while the future and its outlook had many in the temple anxious and unsure, it wasn't the reason why Nox had sought out isolation. Harry, her son, had yet to still awaken since the battle. Her only source of comfort came from the fact that she could still sense her son's presence through their bond. Her son still lived, but after getting thoroughly mind-fucked by the Emperor, his mind had retreated into itself to try and preserve him. Every moment she had to spare was spent at her son's bedside, using every technique she could to try and help him. But so far, everything she'd tried had failed. Even Master Fei was having little to no luck in reaching her son. "He'll be fine, Nox. Your kid's a strong one." Blinking, Nox turned around. "Ashura," she breathed, staring at the semi-translucent form of her former lover standing just a few feet from her. "You're..." "Yup," Ashura smirked as she accented the P. "Still kicking?" "Well, metaphorically at least." Taking a step forward, Nox reached out and tried to touch Ashura's face. To which her former lover leaned in, causing her hand to pass right through. "Worth a shot," Nox muttered as she let her hand drop. "Definitely," Ashura agreed before letting out a breath. "Unfortunately, though Nox, this is where we say goodbye." Clenching her teeth, Nox couldn't meet the Togruta's eyes. "I know," she said, cursing her own weakness as she felt her eyes swell. "Doesn't mean that I have to like it though." "I know." A ghostly hand came up and touched her on the cheek, making Nox close her eyes as she felt Ashura's touch through the force rather than through physical contact. "But you need to let me go now, Nox. For your sake, and for hers." Opening her eyes, Nox stared at her former lover. "Ashura. She deserves to be loved fully, Nox," Ashura added quickly. "And you can't do that while you're still holding on to the past. Let go, Ziri, and look to the future. Just like you always told me to do whenever I would revert to some of my less than desirable Jedi habits. And for what it's worth, Ziri, I approve of your choice. But then again, you always did have good taste. I mean, you did choose me to begin with after all." Unable to help herself, Nox chuckled. "Conceited much?" Ashura returned her chuckle with one of her own and a cocky grin. "Well, I learned everything from you, my love." "Touché," Nox laughed, shaking her head. "All right, the rest of you may as well come out here now as well." One by one, Ravan, Sately, and Darthmar appeared before her. "We thought it would be best to give you two a moment to yourselves first," Sately said serenely as old Jedi Grand Master stood tall and proud beside Mar. "Why, Sately?" Nox said mockingly. "Is that sympathy I hear in your voice? I didn't know you were even capable of processing such a powerful emotion." One of Sately's delicate brows rose. "I should have realized you haven't changed. But then again, after spending several days in that vast emptiness you call your mind, I shouldn't be surprised that you lack the mental capacity for change." Staring at the Jedi, Nox blinked, then quickly turned and looked outside. "Okay, no flying cows or pigs. The sky isn't falling, and the galaxy isn't ending. Are you sure that you are the real Sately Shan? 'Cause I could have just sworn that you made a joke at my expense." "I did," Shan replied, completely straight-faced. "Fine," Nox sighed, as her reply failed to garner the reaction she wanted from the Jedi. "Well, I guess this is goodbye then." "Yes, it is," Ravan nodded as Ashura stepped back so that she was in line with the other three. "You have succeeded where we have failed, Nox. You have done much and brought a measure of balance back to the Force. Yet your trials are not yet done." "I know," Nox nodded. "Still have one pesky Sith Emperor to deal with. Only this time he has most of the galaxy backing him." "Not all support him, Nox," Darthmar intoned. "Many in the galaxy resent the creation of Galactic Empire. In the years to come, you will find allies in the strangest of places. Some old and some new. But never let your guard down. Sidious is nearly Vitiate's equal in terms of power. And Vader is not too far behind. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Mar, Nox sighed before sinking down to her knees. Well, thank you. All of you. And now, may my light redeem you and send you on to be one with the Force once more. One by one, the Force ghost before her began to glow as she channeled the Force through her and into them. Bit by bit, each part on their body began to become more and more translucent as they found their conduit into the Force that Nox had opened for them. And bit by bit, she could feel the power they'd given her slowly seep out of her body. Thank you, my love, Ashura's voice rang in her mind as her form disappeared. And goodbye, until we meet again in the Force. Opening her eyes, Nox stared blankly into her empty office. Getting up slowly, Nox all but collapsed into her chair as exhaustion took hold. Fuck. She cursed, letting her head fall back. That was a lot more taxing than last time. Come in, Tonks. The door to her office slid open silently, allowing a more than slightly nervous Nymphadora entry. Is this a bad time? I can come back. No, Nox said, shaking her head and shutting the doors behind Tonks with a wave of her hand. In fact, I think right now I would prefer your company more than anything. Nodding, Tonks silently made her way around Nox's desk until she was standing directly behind her. Her soft hands gently brushed against Nox's shoulders for a moment before her thumbs and fingers began to expertly move across her aching muscles. Relaxing into her lover's touch, Nox let out a low groan as Tonks's fingers began gently coaxing her muscles to relax. Do you want to talk about it, Nox? Taking Tonks's hand, Nox brought it around and gently placed a kiss to the back of her hand. Not right now, but one day soon, yes. Sensing a more than familiar feeling coming from Tonks, Nox reaffirmed her hold on the younger woman's hand and pulled her around and into her lap. Nox. Tonks half laughed. What AR? That was as far as she managed to get and Nox sealed her lips with her own. Whatever complaint or objection Tonks had was lost as the two lost themselves in each other. Master Nox. Letting out a low groan, Nox reluctantly pulled herself back from Tonks, who gave her an all-too-knowing look of amusement. Someone either be dead or dying, Nox growled, making Tonks giggle even more as she reached over and activated their end of the commune link. This had better be important. It is Master Nox, the voice, who Nox recognized as Master Fei, responded as Tonks began to burrow into Nox's neck while leaving a trail of light kisses starting at her jawline. Then what is it? She asked, trying to pay attention as Tonks renewed her assault against her neck. Harry is beginning to regain consciousness. Tonks's ministrations immediately ceased as both women went stock still. Go, Tonks said, rising off Nox before she could utter a word. He needs you now more than I. I'll be down in a minute, Nox responded before shutting off the COMM link. Rising from her seat, she took a half step around it before stopping. Nymphadora. Tonks managed to get her hands up in time to catch the metal cylinder that Nox had thrown at her from her desk. The young woman's eyes went impossibly wide as she stared at the lightsaber in her hands. Nox, this. I expect you to be ready to train with myself and Astoria first thing in the morning, Nox said, cutting her off. I don't want you cutting your own limb off with that thing when you use it. Nox, Tonk call out again, this time more insistent. This lightsaber. It was Ashura's. Now it is yours, Nox answered, turning around to face her lover fully. She wanted you to have it. And so do I. It belongs in the hands of the woman I love. Not on a shelf gathering dust. Nox clearly saw tears starting to form at the corners of Tonks's eyes. Tonks opened her mouth to respond, but Nox merely turned on her heel before she could, operating out of the office and leaving one thoroughly stunned young woman behind. Standing on the bridge of the Sately Shan along with his mother and Admiral Hackett, Harry was doing everything in his power to keep himself calm as he watched yet another asteroid pass them by. His mind was not what it once was. At least not yet. A consequence of getting royally mind-fucked by the greatest dark entity the galaxy had ever known. It'd taken nearly 3 days for Harry even to regain the mental capacity to awaken. And even then, it was only 3 days because his mother and Master Fei had taken rotating shifts at his bedside to help him heal his mind. It was only because he had begged, on his hands and knees, that he could go on this mission. But even then, it was on the condition that if he showed even the slightest bit of unease or weakness he would be sent to the med bay and sealed within even if his mother had to ward off the entire level to ensure it. Harry, are you all right? Turning his head, he nodded to Ahsoka who was standing just off to his left. Yeah, he nodded to her before he resumed staring out of the forward viewport. He felt something warm brush against his hand as Ahsoka's hand settled into his own. There's no shame in admitting you're not well, Harry, Ahsoka said, speaking through their mind link to avoid any eavesdropping. Even Master Nox and Master Yoda take a break when they need to. True, he admitted. But whatever vitiate hid out here has to be incredible. He crawled out from the rock he was hiding under just because we discovered where it was located. It must be big. A ship, or some sort of weapon. Whatever it is, I want to be here when we find it. If for no other reason than to throw one last insult at the bastard that tried to steal my mind and body from me. Visual confirmation of target in 30 seconds. Admiral, Grand Master, the pilot called out as he roughly banked the cruiser around an asteroid, causing most of the crew to grab hold of something to make sure they didn't tilt. Thank you, Mr. Monria, Knox called out. And I would like to remind you that this is a cruiser, not a fighter. Continue making maneuvers like that last one and I will turn you into a figurehead and mount you on the prow of this ship. Am I understood? Yes ma'am, the pilot, who Harry had learned went by the nickname of Joker, yelled back in a slightly higher pitched tone than normal. Right, no crazy maneuvers, no fun it, whoa, that's a big rock. Keeping his eyes forward, Harry couldn't help but silently agree with the pilot. The asteroid right in front of them was positively enormous. It was so big Harry was half convinced that it wasn't an asteroid at all, but rather a small moon that had somehow gotten knocked out of orbit. How did we miss something that big, Moth? But Knox wasn't paying attention to him. In fact, she wasn't paying attention to anyone or anything save for the large asteroid right in front of them. Scan the asteroid, she called out to no one in particular. For what ma'am? Anything, she shot back, her eyes still on the rapidly approaching rock. The crewmen immediately got back to their task, their hands moving blindingly fast over their control panels. Hey, well that's odd. What is it? Knox asked, finally prying herself away from the viewport. There's nothing there, the crewman responded, clearly confused. There has to be some sort of interference or something. But every sensor we have on the ship, Grand Master, both magical and non-magical, are saying that there is nothing but empty space in front of us. Knox didn't look necessarily surprised for some reason. In fact, she looked pleased. Good, she said, moving forward until she was almost on top of Joker as she reached over and began typing into his terminal. Take us as close as you can to these coordinates, Mr. Monria. Turning and facing Harry, she strode past the two of them without a glance. Admiral, have the shuttle prepared for immediate departure. We're heading down to the surface. Yes ma'am, Admiral Hackett nodded, sparing Harry and Ahsoka a parting nod before returning his attention back to the ship. Take us in nice and easy, Monria. Any scratches and it comes out of your pay. Harry and Ahsoka were left scrambling to catch up with Knox, and the two just barely made it onto the elevator behind her before the shut just behind them. Mother, Harry said cautiously, seeing that his mother's focus was still on the strange asteroid they were approaching. What is that asteroid? I've never seen you so, well, spooked. Knox's eyes blinked as she shook her head and regarded her son. I'm not spooked, Harry. Merely, momentarily confused if you will. But if this asteroid is what I think it is, then it might just be the answer that we've been looking for. The answer to what, Master Knox? Ahsoka asked as the elevator stopped and the doors opened, revealing the hangar bay. To how we're going to fight against the Empire, my dear, Knox said, hurrying out of the elevator. Following closely behind her, Harry saw several members of the ship's flight crew scrambling to prepare the LAAT shuttle while General Rex and Commander Gregor watched on. Grand Master Knox, Rex called out, snapping to attention as the three of them approached. The shuttle is just about ready for departure, ma'am. Good, Knox nodded, sweeping past the two clone troopers and into the shuttle. Pilot, take off immediately. Yes ma'am. The pilot responded, flipping through the last of his pre-flight checks as Harry, Ahsoka, Rex, Wolf and half a dozen other soldiers stepped up into the shuttle and took their seats. Knox didn't take a seat, as she stayed almost directly behind the pilot as they flew out of the hangar and towards the asteroid. As they grew ever closer, with Knox guiding their every movement, Harry couldn't help but notice something. Ahsoka, you've seen quite a few asteroids, right? More than I care to count, Ahsoka nodded. Skyguy was a little unconventional during the war. That's one way of putting it, ma'am, Rex added. Remember that time he had us tanks on an asteroid and them used the cruiser as bait to draw in a Seppi command ship in close to us? That was an interesting mission. Still can't believe we pulled that off. Well. Ahsoka chuckled before a wave of unease settled over her and seeped through the bond. Skyguy was unconventional. Reaching out, Harry blindly placed his hand atop of hers to give her some comfort. Well, have any of you ever seen an asteroid like that one before? Leaning forward in their seats, Ahsoka and the clones stared out the forward viewport. No, Ahsoka said after a pregnant pause. Some of the rock formations seem almost man-made. Not man-made, Knox interjected with her back still turned towards them. Pilot, head for that spot along the canyon wall. Yes ma'am, the pilot nodded as the shuttle slowly descended until it was almost touching the surface of the asteroid. Once they'd reached the location Knox had pointed out, everyone in the shuttle was struck speechless as it was embedded into the canyon wall. Well, call me a clanker, Gregor mumbled. That's a blast door, and pretty damn strong one by the looks of it. Bet we could fire every ordnance we have aboard the Sately Shan at it and it wouldn't even blink an eye at us. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't see a control panel anywhere on the surface either. Luckily, we don't need one, Nox said cryptically as she raised her hand. For a second, nothing happened. But then the shuttle lurched slightly as a crack formed in the blast door as they slowly opened. At an almost excruciatingly slow pace, the door slowly slid to the either side, revealing a room beyond. Once there was a large enough to fit the shuttle, Nox lowered her hand, her breathing more than slightly labored. Move us in and then turn us around. Harry, Ahsoka. I'm going to need your help to close the door once we're in. Slowly, the shuttle inched its way into the darkened room. The floodlights on the shuttle illuminated the interior, revealing a small room that was just barely wide enough to fit 2 maybe 3 shuttles at most. This looks like some sort of airlock, Ahsoka muttered to him as the shuttle slowly turned around towards the exit. That's because it is, Nox commented. Now help me shut the doors. Reaching out, Harry could sense his mother and Ahsoka grabbing either side of the sliding doors. Adding his strength to their own, the 3 of them slowly closed the doors until they were pressed tight against one another and then slid the seals into place. The moment the doors shut, the emergency lights within the shuttle came to life, providing a small amount of illumination. Grand Master, the pilot called out. Admiral Hackett is requesting an update immediately. Apparently, we disappeared from scanners the moment the doors shut. Tell him that we're fine, Nox said simply. There's minerals within this asteroid which interferes with just about every form of scanner invented. Oh, and check the atmosphere. I want to know if we can step out or not. The pilot nodded, relaying her message to the Admiral before checking a few of the instruments in front of him. Atmospheric readings are normal. Nitrogen and oxygen levels are in the green end, and there's even gravity. Good, Nox nodded before opening the shuttle doors and hopping down off the shuttle and marching away, leaving Harry and the others to catch up to her. Pulling out his wand, Harry created a sphere of light and hung in the air above them as Ahsoka did the same and Rex and Gregor activated the spotlights on their helmets. Mother, Harry called out as Nox reached the wall that was on the opposite side of the main door. You know what this place is, don't you? Yes, I do, Nox nodded as she pressed down on a seemingly random spot on the wall. A loud groaning echoed through the immediate area as a section of the wall cracked away from the rest and moved back, creating a path for them to follow. Tell me, Nox continued as she stepped through the new opening while creating her own sphere of light and sending it ahead of her. What do you all know of the Ricketan Infinite Empire? The Ricketan? Ahsoka asked, clearly confused. I think I remember reading something about them during my years in the Jedi Temple. Didn't they control the galaxy before the creation of the Republic or the Empire? Yes, Nox nodded as she led them deeper into the asteroid. The Ricketan predate the Republic, the Empire, even Sith and Jedi. They were arguably the first to truly conquer the known galaxy. Until one day they just disappeared. No one knows how their empire fell or even what happened to them. Almost all records of the Ricketan have been lost to time. But there is one thing that is known. The Ricketan were known as the Builders. A name they earned after several of their constructs were found thousands of years after their disappearance. 3 of which were of note more so than any other. Coming to a dead end, Nox searched the wall for a second before pressing down on another random section of wall to open another path. What were these constructs, ma'am? Rex asked as his head kept in constant motion, searching for threats. The first, and the most well-known, was the station known as the Star Forge, Nox continued with her lecture as she led them deeper and deeper. It was a giant mobile space station that was capable of creating capital ships, dreadnoughts, supply ships, and droids. And if you remember your history well, you will remember that Revan destroyed the Star Forge. The second construct is one that has only been read about and has no name. But, if what has been theorized about it is correct, then it can terraform an entire world faster than any current or even theorized process. And the last, and the one that we are currently on board is known as the Foundry. Opening another section of wall, Nox led them into a large open chamber. As they stepped inside, Harry couldn't help but gaze around in awe as the 3 spheres of light filtered into the room. Even with all 3 lights spacing themselves out, barely half of the large room was illuminated. The room was empty. Save for a few smaller rocks that were floating in midair. And the single platform that they were standing on, which led towards a large control center located in the middle of the room. The Foundry? Rex questioned as he stared around. So, this is a giant manufacturing facility then, Grand Master? What can it make? Chuckling slight, Nox made her way towards the center of the room. The question isn't what it can make, General. The question is what the Foundry can't make. During my brief time studying this place and based off the reports that I read from the Imperial scientists who were sent in to study it, this facility can create an almost inconceivable number of droids in a matter of days. Everything from battle droids to protocol droids. It can also create fighters and frigates. Unfortunately, it cannot create a cruiser or dreadnought like the Star Forge. But it can create the pieces of the ship which can be assembled at a different location easily. And best of all, Nox said, coming to stop before the control panel in the center of the room. All that it takes to run this facility, is a single force user. Raising her hand, Harry watched in amazement as the panel came to life under her outstretched hand. The entire facility shuddered as the sound of gears turning echoed. Lights began turning on, illuminating the room they were in as the rock that had been suspending in the air began to slowly drift downwards into the depths below. As he watched, Harry breathed the only word that he could think of now, wicked. Indeed son, Nox smiled as several screens began coming to life above the panel. General Rex, something you wish to add? Blinking, Harry turned around towards General Rex. The clone had taken his helmet off and was watching the rocks floating downwards with a bemused smile on his face. Just, ironic ma'am. My brothers and I fought against the Clankers to try and keep the Republic alive. And now we're going to be fighting with the Clankers to bring the Empire down. Just, ironic ma'am. Ahaska's lips turned upwards as Harry felt amusement filter through their bond. Yes, it is General, Nox nodded as specifications for droids began appearing on screen. But as any halfway decent Force wielder will be able to tell you, the Force loves its ironies. The sun was shining down brightly on the small village of Godric's Hollow as a lone man wearing a long dark robe walked down its streets. Coming upon a small cemetery, the man hesitated only a moment before he opened the gate and made his way in. Walking between the headstones, the man made his way towards the back until he came upon two that were side by side. Kneeling, Harry Potter gently brushed off some debris that had covered his parents' headstones. Hey Mum, Dad, Harry said, gently tracing the name of his parents as he talked. I'm sorry that I haven't been to see you in, well, a long time. But I've been more than a little busy, as I'm sure you guys no doubt know. Reaching into the folds of his robe, Harry pulled out two pristine red roses. Laying one on each headstone, he rolled back on his heels and sat down between his parents' graves. It's been over 2 years since the war started. Or rather, since the Day of Reckoning, as everyone has come to call it. And, well, it's been a rough ride. Pausing, Harry looked up at the blue sky and just sat there, enjoying the feeling of the sun on his face. Despite losing the Emperor, the Sith didn't lose as much ground as we'd hoped. Nightshade was right there to pick up after the Emperor's death. She took over command of the children and the condemned. And they have the same blind obedience towards her that they did towards Vitiate. Not to mention those dragons that she modified. Merlin's balls were those things a pain in the arse to deal with. But instead of attacking us head-on, she went underground and operated purely from the shadows, stoking the fires of war that were already spreading across the world. The problem was, we simply didn't have the numbers to quell so many civil wars. Even with the droids that Foundry was able to supply us with. It seemed like we would just manage to stop one fight and then 3 more would spring up. Merlin knows all of us within the Guardian Order were starting to get exhausted. Stopping again, Harry once again reached into his robes and pulled out a small hip flask. I hope that you don't mind, Mum, he said, taking a sip from a fire whiskey. I know that Dad wouldn't care, but Sirius helped me to develop a taste for this. I don't drink it too often, but, will you know, it does help on occasion. The non-magicals don't call it liquid courage for nothing, right? Taking another sip, Harry closed the flask off and put it back. Where was I? Oh yeah, so we didn't seem to be making any headway at all. We couldn't find Nightshade and one conflict after another just kept getting in our way. And then, I really don't know how it happened, but one day nearly a third of the world's population just seemed to have enough and they joined up with us. Might have something to do with the fact that the countries that were under the protection of the Guardian Order were prospering thanks to the droids. Anyway, after that everything just seemed to go our way. Mother took a leading role in the formation of a new world government, and even right now there's talk of making her position permanent. Despite quite a few protests, but those are few and far between. And that day might not just be too far off either. Considering about 90% of Earth is now a part of this new Earth government, although Mother said she's seriously thinking about changing the name of that. I think she'd prefer something along the lines of the Imperial Republic or something like that, Harry added with a smile. And speaking of the war, it should almost be over now. We've finally managed to track her down, Nightshade that is. The last remnant of the new Sith Order that plunged Earth into chaos. She was slippery, not even her own subordinates knew where she was. But she slipped up. And now we have her. And with one last campaign we're looking to bring an end to the Sith on Earth. Feeling a soft wind blowing across his face, Harry tilted his head back and basked in the moment of peace. Of course, not everything has been smooth sailing. Politically, things were a nightmare for a long time and still are. The reveal of the fact that magic did indeed exist nearly caused another civil war to break out. And then Mother's reveal that she too was magical didn't really help matters, not that she could have hidden it. But still, after all the death and destruction more than a few people were and still are, leery of magic. And the same can be said of the magicals being leery of world knowing of their continued existence. The memory of the witch hunts is still fresh in their minds. And then came the even bigger bombshell, so to speak. The reveal that most of the Guardian Order, and most of Mother's trusted advisors, are in fact alien refugees. That caused more than a few protests. But at the same time, it seemed to stop more protests than it started. Everyone became fascinated. And scared. But with all the good the Guardians, specifically the non-humans among us, had done seemed to win the people over. And soon the fact that they weren't even human didn't seem to matter. At least to most. There are still a few die-hard groups out there that are completely xenophobic. But they're few and far between. In fact, Harry continued. Things have actually gotten to the point where Mother is pretty much in control of 4/5 of the planet right now. All the world's official military have been centralized and now report to her. It was quite a shock when one day we looked at it and realized just what was going on. Without even meaning to, Mother had basically become an empress in all but name seemingly overnight. And the bigger shock came from the newly created World Senate. A referendum had been presented to make Mother's position permanent. Of course, the former Jedi Masters that came with us didn't necessarily care for that too much, despite the good she's done. And it took Mother dosing herself with Veritasirum to get them to believe that she had no hand in the referendum. And once they realized that this was in fact the will of the people, they stepped back and agreed to it. It passed through the World Senate almost unanimously, and it's now gone on to a world vote. Which just so happened to occur 2 days past, and we're now waiting to hear about the official results. But that's enough of that, Harry said, letting out a low breath. I'm sure you two don't really care about what's going on in the war. On to things you two probably do care about. Believe it or not, Dad, Amelia managed to drag Sirius to the altar before she gave birth to their son. James Regulus Black. I was half afraid that Sirius would name me his godfather, but Amelia or someone must have talked to him before that happened, because he ended up naming Remus James's godfather. And it was a good choice too. Remus is an excellent godfather. Oh, and about Remus. He asked Ela to marry him, and she turned him down flat. She then slapped him upside the head and said that they were already mated, which apparently means more than just a simple marriage to the werewolves. Anyway, about 2 weeks ago Ela dropped a bombshell of her own. She's pregnant. Remus fainted on the spot. I don't think I've ever seen Mother laugh so hard in my entire life. And speaking of having someone in your life, I've found the someone for me, Harry continued, unable and unwilling to stop the smile from spreading across his face. Her name is Ahsoka Tano. And Dad, I'm keeping the family tradition going cause she's not human. She's not even from Earth. But I know that you would both like her. Mum, you'd like her cause she's wicked smart, strong and caring. Dad, you'd like her cause she's drop dead gorgeous and a total badass. She's kicked my arse more than once already when I deserved it. Pausing, Harry stared up at the sky, allowing the wind to gently brush across his face. I really wish that you two could have met her. But I know that you are both one with the Force, and that you are both looking down on us. Rising to his feet, Harry brushed off his knees as he stood fully. I love you both, Mum and Dad. And I miss you, more than words can describe. But one day I know that we will see each other again. But not yet. Resting his hand atop each gravestone one last time, Harry gave each of his parents a smile before turning his back on them and walking away. Less than 2 blocks from the graveyard, a lone LAAT was sitting in the middle of the street. Ahsoka and Ginny were both standing just beside the LAAT as they waited for him. Ahsoka was the first to spot him, her eyes lit up slightly as he approached, and she took a step forward to meet him before he could reach the LAAT. Are you okay, Harry? She asked as she wrapped her arms around his middle. Yes, Harry answered. Ahsoka pulled back and met his eyes. There's still pain within you, Harry. And there always will be, Harry answered back. Nothing can change that. But I won't let that pain consume me. I know, Harry, Ahsoka shot back as she pulled away from him. I'm not worried about that. By Morgana's bloody knickers, I told you two that this is like peeping through the bed curtains when you two do your mind-speaking shite so close to me, Ginny called out, ending the moment between the two. Pressing a light kiss to Ahsoka's forehead, Harry pulled away from his girlfriend. And you're still a peeping Tom, Ginny, or is there another phrase that would be appropriate seeing as how you're a dame? Ginny waved him off, but Harry could still feel a slight amount of embarrassment from his apprentice. In your dreams, master. As if I would ever want to spy on you. Ahsoka, maybe. But you, no. Thanks, apprentice, Harry grumbled as he stepped past the two chuckling women. Just for that, I think you've earned 3 hours of meditation after the battle is over. Are you three done flirting yet? Daphne asked as she leaned forward enough to poke her head around the side door of the LAAT. Our forces are at the final staging area before Nightshade's headquarters. If we don't leave now, Grand Admiral Hackett will start the battle without us. Well, Harry said, pulling himself into the LAAT with Ginny and Ahsoka stepping in right behind him. Making a quick turn, he spotted Hermione, Susanna, and Luna were all still seated with their eyes closed as they began preparing for what was to come. Well, ladies, let's go end a war. Sitting on her makeshift throne, Empress Nightshade took a long pull from her pipe as she listened to the bombardment that was currently leveling what little was left of her forces in her primary base of operations. She knew that her time was almost over. Not that she necessarily planned on going quietly either. No. She was going to make these fools that foiled her plans work for it. Another bomb went off, this one close enough to shake the very foundations of her empty throne room. Tapping her pipe to against a golden plate, Nightshade stared blankly at the empty room. Everything had been going perfectly. The children were awakened by the Emperor. Dragons altered and made to follow her every order. The world was in chaos. And the forces of light were pushed back to the brink of extinction. All had been going to plan. And then it all went to shit the moment Vitiate got himself killed. Not that his death was unwanted. No, far from it. But Nightshade was supposed to have been the one to kill the ancient entity. At a time of her choosing once she'd learned everything she could from it. She'd learned how to create the children with a bond to the Emperor. But she was not able to replicate the procedure again for some reason. At best she'd only been able to turn the few children that were still around to her side. She also never learned how to fully create the Dementors. She studied the memory of Voldemort creating them time and time again, she even tried to replicate the ritual, but she failed every time. And now she never would be able to do it right. Because the bitch killed the Emperor long before she could learn what his secret was. And then came the blasted droids. How Nox was able to make so many so quickly, or even create them in the first place, still confused Nightshade. And just about everyone else in the world as well. It was well known that the Guardians had managed to find or create some sort of factory that could pump out the walking rust buckets faster than Vila went through partners. But no one outside of the Order knew where this factory was. Every attempt Nightshade made to find it was for naught and often cost her valuable resources that she couldn't easily replace. And as Nox and her precious Order started claiming one victory after another across the war-torn earth, both Muggles and Magicals started to flock to her banner. One by one, nations stopped their infighting and threw their lot in with Nox. In private, Nightshade could almost admire Nox for what she was doing. The bitch was creating a world order that followed her every command. It didn't matter that Nox was a Magical. It didn't matter that some of her most trusted advisors and a fair portion of the Guardian Order were in fact alien refugees. The people looked up to her with a devotion that was almost fanatical. It was sickening. A vote had already been called for on a global scale about whether Nox's position would be made into a lifetime appointment. And from what her own spies, the few she had left, had reported, she wouldn't really be surprised if after this battle Nox would be named the Empress of Earth. And the people of Earth just seemed to accept it. Not that I intend to allow her to have the position, Nightshade thought as she set her pipe aside and gracefully rose to her feet as the sounds of fighting grew ever closer to her throne room. There is only room for one Empress of Earth. Walking down her dais, she soundlessly summoned her wand to her left hand and her goblin-wrought sword to her right just as the doors to her inner chambers were thrown open. Coming to the base of the stairs, Nightshade cocked her head slightly at the lone figure that stood in the doorway. I should have known that Nox was too much of a coward to come and fight me herself. Standing just within the now open doors was none other than the one that Voldemort feared. The one that had been prophesied to defeat the Dark Lord. Nox's own adopted son, and personal lapdog, Harry Potter. My mother isn't a coward, the boy snapped back, but without any real heat in his voice. She simply had larger issues to deal with at the moment. So, she sent me to deal with taking out the trash. Ha, Nightshade laughed slightly, shaking her head. Almost amusing boy. Did it take your feeble mind all day to come up with that insult? Nah, Harry replied, shaking his head. I'm just quick like that. Huffing, Nightshade stared past the boy. Tell me boy. Where are your well-known protectors? The Valkyries, if I am not mistaken. If not Nox, I was at least expecting that you and your Valkyries would be the ones to come for me. But here you are, alone. Not even your pet apprentice or that alien slut you parade around. The boy's lightsaber snapped into existence and was pointed right towards her as the air in the room became physically heavier. Do not speak of Ahsoka like that again. Or what? Nightshade asked mockingly. You'll kill me? You're already here to do that. You'll torture me? I doubt that as well. No. Save your breath boy. Your threats mean nothing to me now. Everything I have worked so hard for is gone. You have nothing left to threaten me with. The boy stared hard at her for a moment before his shoulders dropped and he let out a slight chuckle. Well, I guess that you got me on that one. So, what do we do now? Skip the whole insulting each other phase and get right to the part where we try to kill one another. Reversing her grip on her sword, she drove the blade down hard enough to sink it several inches into the tile floor. I like you boy, she said, letting go of the sword, which stayed in place, and tucked her wand back into her sleeve. And I believe that we shall do just that. But before we begin, I would have you humor me for a moment. Tell me, were you the one who killed Sanguine? Sanguine? Harry asked, clearly caught off guard. Now that is a name that I haven't heard in a long time. But to answer your question, no, I didn't kill him. My mother disarmed him, quite literally, and let Daphne end his miserable existence. Why? Did he mean something to you? No, Nightshade responded. But I meant everything to him. For without me, he wouldn't have even existed. Grabbing hold of the small necklace around her neck, Nightshade roughly snapped the chain around her neck and threw the offending object away from her. Across from her, Harry's eyes widened in surprise as he took a half step back to turn his body sideways. Not that Nightshade could blame him, of course. The necklace wasn't some simple illusion. It was a powerful enchantment that changed her entire physical being. And after wearing it for so long, she could feel each change that occurred. She could feel it as her hair lengthened and turned white. She could feel it as her skin went ashen. She could feel her ears elongated and become pointed at the tips. She could feel her fingers extend and nails lengthen and sharpen. And most of all, she could feel as her jaw altered, and her teeth became fangs in her mouth. You're just like Vlad, Harry stated as he stared at her. You're the other vampire dreadlord. Feeling the change cease, Nightshade rolled her head around as she adjusted once again to her true form. I am nothing like Vlad, Nightshade responded, opening her now blood-red eyes and staring down at the boy. I was one of the first to be granted this gift. And I am the eldest vampire on this world, boy. Every vampire that walks this earth has blood that can be traced back to me. And it was my destiny to turn this world into a paradise. A destiny you and your mother ruined when you destroyed the key to my ascension. The Emperor, Harry stated. Yes, Nightshade drawled, grabbing a hold of her sword and roughly pulling it from the ground. Now come, boy. We have wasted enough time with this pointless chatter. Shifting his stance, the boy held onto his lightsaber with two hands and brought it up to his back shoulder. Your funeral, Nightshade. Standing on the balcony overlooking the Guardian Temple, Nox stared off into the horizon as the sun began its slow descent. While she was present in physical form, her mind was anywhere but at the temple as she watched through her mind's eye the battle going on across the world. A battle to end the Sith. She could sense her army's steady advance despite everything Nightshade threw at them. The mixture of guardians, magicals, non-magicals and droids cutting through the last of the Sith's forces with ease. She felt as Harry cut an unrelenting path through Nightshade's inner sanctum until she was left standing alone in front of the last of the Sith on Earth. She felt the rush of emotion from her son as the end was within his grasp. She felt him draw his weapon and prepare himself. Then, she felt it end. Over, it is. Coming out of her mental state, Nox turned her head slightly and spied Master Yoda sitting cross-legged on a small platform hovering several feet off the ground just off to her left side. Yes, she nodded, not bothering to hide the smile that came to her as she felt the end of the last of the Sith. Nightshade is defeated. The Sith's hold on this world is now gone. Humming, Yoda stared off into the distance with her. One war ends, another begins. Endless cycle, it is. Nodding, Nox turned her back on the view and made her way in. There is an old saying, Master Yoda. Only the dead have seen the end of war. Confrontation is an unfortunate and indisputable part of all sentient beings. And while the wise will not actively seek out confrontation, they must always be ready for it. Wise words they are, Master Nox, Yoda agreed, his floating platform following along beside her. Using a brief push with the Force, Nox moved her chair to the side and sunk down into it. Laying her right hand on her desk, her fingers twitched and itched to press down on the small panel on the corner of her desk that would activate the large television in her room. Nervous, you are? Really? Nox asked rhetorically, casting side-eyed glance at the ancient Jedi Master. What was your first clue? Because nervous, you are, Yoda responded, completely straight-faced. Chuckling in spite of herself, Nox leaned back. Oh Yoda, I'm glad that I will always have your dry humor to fall back on. Perhaps you'd like a permanent spot as a court jester. Yoda's face scrunched up at that. Jester, I am not. No, Nox agreed. You're right. You're too short for that position. Grumbling, Yoda floated away from her. Just as he did, the door to her room opened and Tonks strode in. Nox's metamorphmagus lover had defiantly changed in the past 2 years, and not just physically. She had an air of confidence and grace about her now that reminded Nox of Ashura greatly. And with the fact that Tonks now preferred to wear the robes of the Guardians, despite her not being associated with them, and she wore Ashura's lightsaber at her hip always, it was hard not to compare the two no matter how hard she tried not to. Nox, Master Yoda, Tonks said, greeting the ancient Jedi respectfully with a slight bow. Fighting down the lump in her throat, Nox met the obviously forced neutral face of her lover. Tonks, I take it that the vote has been finalized. Yes, Tonks nodded, which garnered Yoda's attention as his ears twitched. 85% of the world vote has been collected and it was so overwhelming that the Senate decided to call it. So, let me just be the first to say, congratulations Empress Nox. Although that title might change soon as well, bit of a bad vibe according to the Senate but, you get the picture love. Letting go of the breath she hadn't even been aware she was holding in, Nox felt herself relax, if ever so slightly, for the first time in several years. Congratulations. Empress. Turning her head, she felt her elation fall slightly at the look on Yoda's face. Despite what many may believe, Master Yoda, I did not arrange for this to happen. Maybe when I first came to Earth I would have, but now, I was content in my role. And before you start thinking that this is just going to be another Sith Empire, don't. I've lived through the tyranny of the Sith Empire before. And I'm going to aim not to repeat the same mistakes the current Empire, or the Empire of old, have made. Know this, I do. Watching him close his eyes, Nox could almost feel the ancient little creature reach out into the Force for guidance. Pleased with this, the Force is. Follow the path laid by the Force, I will. Good, Nox nodded. For some reason she couldn't explain, the little bugger had grown on her quite a bit as of late. Like an annoying relative that you both tried to avoid and sought approval from at the same time. And besides, this is a promotion for you as well. Chief Advisor. That is of course unless you'd like to stay out of it all and continue to teach the younglings instead. Served as advisor in the past, I have, Yoda nodded, his face pensive. Unsure if I will again, meditate on this, I will. Answer you soon, I will. That's all I can ask for, Nox said, turning back towards Tonks. Anything else, dear? Yes, Tonks nodded. The Senate won't be announcing the tally until tomorrow. But until then they want to send over an armed security detail until a new division can be formed. No need, Nox shot back, grabbing one of the dozen of data pads up off her desk and tossing it over to Tonks. These 7, should they agree to the transfer, will be the first wave of my security detail. Who knows, maybe we'll name the new division after them. Something 7 I think would work the best. While Tonks was busy scrolling through the names and reading up on their credentials, Nox sent out a mental wave to the next individual that she wanted to talk to. Who'd, conveniently enough, just now arrived back at the temple. Whoa Nox, Tonks breathed as she finished the list. This is a proverbial who's who of war heroes. Of course, they are, Nox nodded, sensing the next individual making their way towards them. This, whatever 7, is going to be the best of the best. Magical and non-magical. Now dear, if you could please go about seeing to that list please. The next conversation about to take place is of a rather delicate nature. Nodding, Tonks gave her a half salute and wink before turning, making her way out of the room. Just as Tonks disappeared, her next guest arrived. Ah, Master Kenobi, please. Come in and have a seat. The middle-aged master nodded politely as he entered the room. Thank you Master Nox, Master Yoda. Tell us, Master Kenobi, Nox said as Obi-Wan took his seat across from her. How goes the relief efforts away from the front lines? Folding his hands together, Kenobi took on an air of serenity as he leaned back. Well enough. The new agricultural droids have made enough headway in the damaged countries that supplying food to the population in those areas will not be an issue. Cleaning up the debris from the cities and finding new housing for the refugees however is taking some time. But those projects are coming along as well. Our best estimate right now is that within a year, maybe 2, almost all damage done by the Sith attacks will have been eradicated. Good, Nox nodded, glad to hear of the progress that was being done with the restoration of Earth. Yes, it is, Obi-Wan nodded, shooting a look between Nox and Yoda. But that is not the reason you asked for me, is it? No, Nox said plainly, seeing no reason to beat around the bush. No doubt you have heard about the vote and its outcome, even if it hasn't been publicly announced. The corner of Kenobi's eye twitched, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion. Maybe to some Kenobi, Nox added, narrowing her eyes. Of all the masters, Kenobi was one of the few that still opening voice his concerns about Nox being elected as a permanent head of state. Now I know well your concerns on the matter, and I actually share some of them as well. Don't forget, I lived through a time where a single being controlled the Sith and the Empire. I know full well the danger of wearing too many hats, as it were. So, to alleviate that I've come to a decision that was, frankly, not easy. As of tomorrow, Master Kenobi, I will be stepping down as Grand Master of the Guardian Order. And as my last act, I'm naming you as the Order's new Grand Master. Congratulations! In one of the very few times since she'd known him, the negotiator was left speechless. Slowly, his head turned back and forth, alternating his gaze from Master Yoda to herself several times before stopping. You're appointing me as Grand Master. Yes, Nox answered simply. Is that so hard to believe? And before you ask, I did offer the position to our little friend here, but he turned me down. My place, to lead the Guardians it is not, Yoda commented before Kenobi could say anything. Best choice for this position Master Kenobi, you are. And don't get me wrong Obi-Wan, Nox cut in. I didn't select you as my successor just because Yoda didn't want it. In fact, you were always my first choice should there ever come a time when I had to step down. Leaning back in his seat, Kenobi's eyes went downward as he visibly tried to process what had just happened. Not that I don't appreciate the sentiment Master Nox, because I do. But why you? Why me? Leaning back against her desk, Nox crossed her arms over her chest. I assume that you mean why you over Master Fei, Shok Ti, Voss, or even Sakura. Master Fei will not be here long. Sure, she has Gabrielle as an apprentice and that will keep her tied to earth for a time. But she follows the will of the Force and one day soon she will leave and there is no telling when she will be back. Voss, well, he's too much of a maverick to hold such a position of responsibility for long. And as for Shok Ti and Sakura, while it is true the three of you are pretty much on equal footing, you have something that the other two do not. Narcissa. That got a slight reaction from the middle-aged man, not much of one. No more than ever so slight reddening of his ears and an uncomfortable cough, but a reaction nonetheless. You mean, the fact that I'm... The fact that you're banging Narcissa has nothing to do with it, Nox cut in, making Kenobi cough more than slightly uncomfortably as his cheeks reddened. Nothing to be ashamed about, Obi-Wan. Jedi stamina is something of a legend. And Narcissa certainly appreciates it if the noises coming from your rooms are anything to go by. But it's not the fact that you are in a relationship that tipped the scales in your favor. It's the fact that you've come to love her. And don't bother trying to deny it. You're still getting used to both accepting, and suppressing, such a powerful emotion to not wear it on your sleeve. And because you are so open about the fact that you love her, well, that just tells me that you truly have accepted the Guardian philosophy. Kenobi stared at her as she finished, his emotions such a chaotic mess that even the cool negotiator couldn't keep them straight. After several long moments he managed to get himself under control and he rose to his feet. If this is truly what you wish for. It is, Obi-Wan. Then I accept, Kenobi nodded. Good, Nox smiled, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Now just because I'm stepping back from the order does not mean that I'm leaving it entirely. I don't want what I've built to fall apart. Not that I think it will under your leadership, but I still wish to be kept appraised of as much as possible. I understand, Kenobi nodded. Good, Nox nodded, standing up and holding out her hand. Well then, congratulations Grand Master Kenobi. Taking her hand, Kenobi gave her an ever so slight smirk. Thank you, Grand Master Nox. I will not fail you. Sitting with her back straight and her head held high, Miranda Lawson studied every face that was sitting around the large conference table she was sitting at. At the young age of only 21, many in the room were more than likely questioning why she was even here at all. And while any normal 21-year-old would be nowhere near these individuals, Miranda was anything but normal. At the tender age of 8 she'd already graduated top of her class from the most prestigious high school her father could get her into. At the age of 11 she received her first bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and biology. And then at 12 she received her bachelor's in psychology. She obtained her double master's degree in chemistry and psychology and then her doctorate at 18. Naturally she had her pick of careers, but then the day of reckoning came about. And everything Miranda thought she knew was thrown out the window. It was during the war that she was approached by her current employer about an opportunity. One that wanted humanity to not only survive the war, but to come out stronger and better than ever before. She spent the entirety of this war performing numerous experiments to try and better humanity. Somewhere, not necessarily to her tastes. But she did what she had to make the most of a terrible situation. And now, the war was over. Nox and her alien guardians had won the war, a fact that rankled her boss more than slightly. And now that same woman who brought the aliens to their doorstep had been declared Empress of Earth, for lack of better term. Which most definitely did not sit well with her employer. Nor did it sit well with the other 24 individuals who were sitting with them at the table. Gentlemen, ladies, Jack Harper, Miranda's boss called out, bringing an end to the idle chatter that had been going on around the room. I thank you all for meeting us here today. I know this location is more than a little unorthodox, but secrecy is our greatest asset now. Especially for a discussion such as the one we're about to have. And what sort of discussion is that? A Middle Eastern man asked while others nodded in agreement. You contacted all of us through unorthodox means to arrange this little meeting, and that is the only reason why I even entertained the idea of attending. Pulling a pack of cigarettes from his coat pocket, her boss calmly pulled one out and lit it before continuing. Let us rewind the clock to 3 years ago. All of you here were the leaders of the world. You had the money and the power to do whatever you wanted. And then the day of reckoning came. Your once secure positions were thrown aside as survival took precedence. And now that things are stable, all of you are still stuck on the outside looking in as Nox takes power. And what do you want us to do about it, Mr. Harper? Miranda's father asked as he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. Despite many of our best efforts, that sorceress bitch still managed to get herself elected to the position she now holds. There is nothing that we can do now but adapt and move on. Taking a long pull, Harper nodded as he let the smoke exit through his nose. You are correct, Mr. Lawson. At the moment Nox is untouchable. Which means we must adapt. Evolve. And what do you suggest we do then? An older Asian woman asked. We take a page out of Nox's own playbook, Harper explained. Nox was brilliant in her plan. She started small, taking over companies and coming out with one innovation after another until she controlled quite a bit of the market. Innovations that I am now certain came from her alien advisors. I'm suggesting that we do the same. You're suggesting that we try to out-innovate beings from another planet. A dark-skinned man laughed. I doubt we will be able to compete. The only reason we failed in the first place was because we were not united, Harper said sharply. Together, our combined assets will be able to match anything Nox can put out. And slowly, we will erode her credibility and take her power base out from underneath her one piece at a time. And once we are ready, we will remove Nox and her aliens from our planet. And then humanity will be back on top, where it belongs. Most around the room looked all too ready to agree. And why shouldn't they? Miranda thought, noting the smug look of satisfaction on her father's face. Most of them have been burned by Nox in the past. It shouldn't be too hard to convince them all to work together. At least until Nox is removed. It is keeping them together after Nox has been removed that will be the problem. Let us hear more of this plan of yours, Mr. Harper. The same Middle Eastern man from before said curiously. Putting out his cigarette and smiled, I'm purposing that we all pool our resources into a single entity called Cerberus. From there we will work in the shadows doing whatever is necessary to not only remove Nox from power, but to make sure that humanity is truly the dominant power amongst these aliens. And how can we be sure that we all receive equal shares from this Cerberus organization? Another voice asked. By contract, this body here will be the board of directors, Miranda spoke up, taking over for her boss as he'd instructed her beforehand. You will each have equal say in what goes on within the organization and will receive equal payouts to all advances, technological or not, and profits that are generated from our expenditures. Of course, that is what they're supposed to believe, Miranda thought as the sheep around the table once again began conversing with one another. But considering this is going to an organization that, technically, doesn't exist. Who will they complain to if the terms of the contract are not met? The Empress? She'd arrest them immediately for being part of an illegal organization. But there is still one fatal flaw in your plan, Mr. Harper, a middle-aged woman said, gaining everyone's attention. Nox herself is a powerful sorceress, or witch if you will. None of us here are godless enough to be cursed with magic. How are we supposed to stand against such a devil spawn? Miranda's fingers tensed slightly at the slur, but she forced herself to remain perfectly calm on the outside. For that, my dear, her boss said calmly. I have a simple answer. On the oldest in history. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I found us a friend. A powerful friend. More than a few in the room stared at Harper with confusion. And where is this friend of ours, Mr. Harper? I am right here, crone. Even though she knew that her boss had invited his newly acquainted friend to this meeting, she had no idea of just who this friend was. And now that she did, Miranda was staring to seriously wish that she hadn't. And the fact that the friend had apparently operated into the room without a single sound was unsettling. Ladies and gentlemen, her boss said with a smile, rising to his feet. I'm pleased to introduce you to our ace in the hole against Nox. Bellatrix Lestrange. Miranda felt her heart skip a beat. She never in a million years thought that she would one day be sitting in the same room as one of the most infamous killers in the magical world. My, Bellatrix purred as she walked down the line of people sitting at the table. You all look like you've just seen a ghost. Bellatrix Lestrange, one of the people around them choked. You died. Stopping in place, Bellatrix stared at the one who'd spoken, and then raised her hands and clapped them together. Nope, still solid. So, I'm not a ghost. Guess that means I'm not dead. I could be an inferi, but I'm still warm and blood still flows through my veins, so that's out. A vampire? Possibly, but nope. No thirst for blood either. Clearing his throat, her boss nodded for Bellatrix to take the lone seat directly across from Miranda. Ms. Lestrange just barely managed to survive the goblins turning on her and her husband. She's been on the run from Nox and her guardians ever since. 2 months ago, I came across her as she was on the run. She was near death, and since then I've been sheltering her in one of my private facilities. Not even my assistant Ms. Larson here knew of her existence. And now, Bellatrix is in perfect health. And more importantly, she's more than a match for Nox. Especially once she finishes undergoing a few enhancements that she's agreed to. Of course, I will be, Bellatrix replied calmly, taking her seat. And what is your price? The Middle Eastern man asked. No one does anything for free. To this, Bellatrix merely smiled and leaned back in her seat while placing her hands behind her head. My dear, I owe a debt. And it's a debt I intend to repay in full. That is all you need to know. Now, are all of you in, or out? More than a few looks, and words were passed over the next few minutes as everyone around the time took their time making their decisions. And through it all, Bellatrix remained sitting there, her hands behind her head like she didn't have a care in the world. Very well, Mr. Harper, the pious woman from earlier spoke up after the talking had died down. We are with you in this plan of yours. Splendid. Bellatrix grinned, rising to her feet and placing her hands into the sleeves of her robes. Then I have no qualms about this. Avada Kedavra. The green streak shot out from Bellatrix's sleeve, sailing through the air and striking the pious woman in the face, sending her head over heels into the ground. Her attack was so sudden that she managed to fire off the deadly curse 3 more times before anyone was even able to leave their seats. Oh no you don't, Bellatrix sung as several people tried in vain to pull on open the doors. Ignis Vincula. A burning red robe shot out from the end of her wand, wrapping around the people at the door. Several screamed as their clothes and skin burned, but Bellatrix showed them no mercy as she flicked her wand and tightened the burning chain, cutting all those that were in its confines in half before disappearing. For Miranda, it seemed like the slaughter took forever when in fact it only took a minute tops. By the time Bellatrix finally lowered her wand, the only 3 left still alive in the room were herself, Bellatrix and her boss. Bellatrix. This was not part of the plan, Harper sighed, drawing out another cigarette. You were supposed to kill them after they signed over their assets to Cerberus. Not before. Bellatrix didn't seem to care as she flopped down in her seat with seemingly not a care in the world. Whoops. Yes, whoops, Harper sighed, lighting up his cigarette. But luckily, this is not the worst case scenario. I've already arranged it so that no one will come looking for these individuals, so their deaths will never even be noticed. Also, while it will take some time I can still take control of their assets, now that they're no longer around to fight against me. But I will say that there is one good thing to come of this little display of yours my dear. You've certainly proved that you have the power to fight against Nox and her guardians. And once we've tested the cybernetic enhancements we have planned out, she'll be no match for you. Just make sure that you do not deviate from the plan from here on out. My patience has a limit. Bellatrix started laughing at that, a deep chuckle that sent chills down Miranda's spine. Oh Jackie boy, I've never deviated from the plan. This was just the first step. And now, this is the second. Miranda didn't even see the witch's hand move as a loud snap echoed through the room, and Jack Harper's head was suddenly facing backwards. His neck snapped clearly in half. The body twitched once, and then fell forward, leaving Jack Harper's surprised, and dead, staring up at the ceiling. Miranda couldn't help the slight tickle of fear that shuddered through her body as Bellatrix brought her wand to bear. A cloth appeared out of nothing and gently settled over her ex-boss's face. Next, the bottle of bourbon that had been set on the table along with 2 glasses slid down the smooth polished wood, coming to a stop in front of the witch. Grabbing the decanter, Bellatrix poured 1 glass for herself, and then a second which she pushed towards Miranda. That should help with the nerves Miranda. Picking up the glass with an only a slightly shaking hand, Miranda drained the entirety of its contents in one go. I never thought that you would be the one that the Empress would send. Taking a sip of her own glass, Bellatrix leaned back in her seat. I'm loyal the Empress, and to the Empress only. She saved me from a hell you cannot possibly imagine. I would gladly give my life or suffer any torment imaginable for her. Oh, and about your father, did you know that he was going to be here? Nodding, Miranda reached across the table and grabbed the bourbon to refill her glass. Yes. Although besides being half of my genome, that is as far as the relationship between he and I goes. He was an absolute ass, and if I could have killed him years ago and gotten away with it I would have. Polishing off her second glass, she fought to keep herself under control as memories of the hell her father put her and her 8-year-old sister through. Not that I question her, but the Empress will uphold her end of the deal, right? Of course, Bellatrix nodded. The Empress is a woman of her word. This, Cerberus will be under your control from here on out. And your sister's name will be at the top of the registry for the Guardian Order. Provided that she passes the tests of course. She will. Miranda nodded with conviction. Her sister had started to show signs of magic abilities just after the start of the war. Her father had of course been gleeful. Not because his daughter had the ability to use magic of course. But because he now had a test subject. After all, that was all Miranda and her sister had even been to her father. Large lab rats. Good. Miranda nodded, setting her glass down and rising to her feet. Then I suppose that this is goodbye. Draining her glass, Bellatrix rose to her feet. Yes, it is. Now, I don't need to tell you the consequence of turning against the Empress now do I? No, Miranda said, sparing a quick glance at all the bodies littering the conference room. You don't. Good, Bellatrix clapped. Then I will bid you farewell my dear. Yes, Miranda nodded, before turning and staring down at her dead father, a small smile forming on her lips. And Bellatrix, thank you. One of Bellatrix's delicate eyebrows rose as she laughed. No need to thank Bellatrix my dear. Bellatrix died 2 years ago in the vaults below Gringotts in London. I am the Empress's wraith. Nothing more, nothing less. Standing in his office overlooking the imperial city world of Coruscant, Emperor Sidious watched as life continued below him. While his face was completely passive, underneath the facade he was anything but. It had been 2 years since the great dark entity disappeared. He remembered the day all too well. While it could be said that the mysterious force user that managed to stem the tide of the purge had managed to stabilize the force, it was the disappearance of the dark side entity that had now caused the force to shift back away from the dark and towards the light. Which was something that he could not afford. But even if I wanted to stem this trend, he thought angrily, turning his back on the scene below. I am incapable of interfering with this mysterious force user, even though I have a rough idea of where she is hiding. While the disappearance of the dark side entity had been a serious blow, there had been one benefit that had arisen from its disappearance. Whatever protection this mysterious force user had wavered when the entity disappeared. He had, of course, immediately latched onto the disturbance to try and identify the force user, but what he'd found was something else entirely. An entire world that was saturated in the force, much like Korriban or even Tython. And on the surface of the planet he felt thousands, no, millions of force users. He'd been so astounded by what he'd found, that he'd forgotten to shore up his own defense, which the mysterious force user took advantage of. And while he was busy marveling at the planet, the force user somehow blinded him within the force. He could still catch glimpses of the future, but his ability to sense across the galaxy was simply gone. He could tell that he still had the ability to do so, but it was almost as if he'd simply forgotten how the technique was performed. It was incredibly infuriating and had led to the death of 3 of his personal guards when he'd discovered just what she'd done to him. But even with his blindness, he still knew approximately where this force user was hiding. Deep in the uncharted section of the galaxy. A perfect place to hide, he sneered, throwing himself into his seat. Even if I wanted to go after her and her Jedi allies, I am unable to do so. My empire is still in its infancy, and there are pockets of resistance across the galaxy that are against my rule. It's taking most of the military just to keep these insurgents down. And even if I did have the manpower to spare, I could not reach her. There are no hyperspace routes through the unknown regions. And mapping out a new route for the Imperial forces could take decades, if not centuries. No. Going after this force user in this new world is impossible. We will have to wait. Be patient. Even with the forces she has, she does not have the power to combat the might of my empire. She will have to gain allies. Allies here in the known galaxy. Which means she will have to send out emissaries. Emissaries that will have a route through the unknown regions. Yes, that is what we will do. I just need to have patience. Soon she will slip. And I will have the map to this new force world. And then the Sith will control not only the known galaxy, but the unknown as well. A/N. Well everyone, there we go. The end to the second arch of In All Things Balance. And I must say, I never expected it to be this long. This definitely got away from me. Anyway, hope that you all enjoyed it. Now, on to the bad news. As all of you have not doubt noticed, but my chapters have come out at a ridiculously slow pace as of late. The reason for this is twofold. First, my muse has all but abandoned me as of late. I had my outline and knew where I wanted to go, but the words just wouldn't come out. Second, well my wife is pregnant with our first child so my attention is, hopefully, understandably diverted at the moment. So anyway, I do plan on continuing to write, but things will be coming out at a much slower pace from now on. I am going to start working on the 3rd installment IATB, Unification War, but right now I'm going to try and get a few chapters in before releasing it on fanfiction here. Again, hope that you all enjoyed it. Please leave a review and let me know what you all thought.